waiting for this for a while. Attend, O reader, our tale of wonder, and welcome back to Paper Cuts, everyone. Uh, Last we left off, we were learning about the intrepid adventurers who search for the contents of the Silver Dome. We last week we heard that Leland escaped and recovered his pistol and is now at large in the palace, terrorizing the household, which is never good. Let's see what else. A lot of things happened off camera. I have now moved out of the RV, which is very exciting. There should be now some very interesting opportunities upcoming, for me and for the podcast at large. But, we'll unpack those later and more thoroughly elsewhere. Let's dive in right where we left off into the Silver Dome from the August 1930 issue of Astounding Stories of Super Science. Frank jumped to his feet just as a shot rang out of the antechamber. Oren dashed the portal when a second shot spat forth from the automatic, which must certainly be in the hands of a madman. The doors swung wide, and Leland, hair disarranged and bloodshot eyes staring, burst into the room. Oren went down at the next shot, and the hardly recognizable scientist advanced toward the dais. We almost forgot our boy. Can't forget the boy. Deploy the boy. Anyway. When he saw Frank and Tommy, he stopped in his tracks. "So, you've been following me. Well, you won't keep me from my purpose. I'm here to kill this queen of hell." Once more he raised his automatic, but Frank had been watching closely, and he literally dove from the steps of the dais to the knees of the deranged Leland. As beautiful a tackle as he'd ever made in his college football days laid the maniac low with a crashing thud that told of a fractured skull. The bullet intended for Phaestra went wide, striking Tommy in the shoulder. Once more, no, we already read that. Spun halfway around by the impact of the heavy bullet, Tommy fought to regain his balance, but his knees went suddenly awry and gave way beneath him. He crumpled helplessly to the floor, staring foolishly at the prostrate figure of Leland, and at Frank, who had risen to his feet and now faced the beautiful Empress of Theros. Strange lights danced before Tommy's eyes, and he found it difficult to keep the pair in focus, but he was sure of one thing: his pal was unharmed. Then the two figures seemed to merge into one, and he blinked his eyes rapidly to clear his failing vision. By George, they were in each other's arms! Funny world, above or below, it didn't seem to make any difference. But it was a tough break for Frank. Not, morganatic marriage and all that. No chance, well... And Tommy succumbed to his overpowering drowsiness. The awakening was slow, but not painful. Rather, there was a feeling of utter contentment, of joy at being alive. A delicious languor pervaded Tommy's being as he turned his head on a snow-white silken pillow and stared at the figure of the white-capped nurse who was fussing with the bottles and instruments that lay on an enameled table beside the bed. Memory came to him immediately. He felt remarkably well and refreshed. Experimentally, he moved his left shoulder. There was absolutely no pain, and it felt perfectly normal. He sat erect in his surprise and felt the shoulder with his right hand. There was no bandage, no wound. Had he dreamed of the hammer blow of that 45 caliber bullet? His nurse, observing that her patient had recovered consciousness, broke forth in a torrent of unintelligible Theronian, then rushed from the room. He was still examining his unscarred shoulder in wonder when the nurse returned with Frank Rowley at her heels. Frank laughed at the expression of his friend's face. "Why, what's wrong, old-timer?" "Well, I thought that fool of a Leland had shot me in the shoulder, but I guess I dreamed it. Where are we? Still in Theros?" "Well, we are." Frank sobered instantly, and Tommy noted with alarm that his usually cheerful features were haggard and drawn, and his eyes hollow from loss of sleep. And you didn't dream that Leland shot you. That shoulder of yours was mangled and torn beyond belief. He was using soft-nosed bullets, the hellhound. Then how? Tommy, these Theronians are marvelous. We rushed you to this hospital, and half a dozen doctors started working on you at once. They repaired the shattered bones by an instantaneous grafting process, tied the severed veins and arteries, and closed the gaping wound by filling it with a plastic compound and drawing the edges together with clamps. You were anesthetized, and some ray machine was used to heal the shoulder. Well, it required 10 hours, but they say now that your arm is as good as ever. How's it feel? Perfectly natural. In fact, I feel better than I have in a month. Tommy observed that the nurse had left the room, and he jumped from his bed and capered like a schoolboy. This drew no sign of merriment from Frank, and Tommy scrutinized him once more in consternation. And you? What is wrong with you? Oh, don't worry about me, replied Frank impatiently. Then, irreverently, he said, Leland's dead. Should be. I knew we shouldn't have started out to help him, but Frank, I'm concerned about you. You look badly. Tommy was getting into his clothes as he spoke. Ah, forget it, Tommy. You've been sleeping for 2 days, you know, part of that cure and all. I haven't had much rest during that time, that's all. It's that face for a woman. Well, perhaps, but I'll get over it, I suppose. Tommy, I love her, but there's no place for me. Haven't seen her since the row in the palace. Her council surrounds her continually, and I've been advised today that we are to be returned as quickly as you're up and around. Means immediately now. Good, the sooner the better. And you just forget about this queen as soon as you're able. She's a peach, of course, but not for you. Lots more back in little old New York, after all. But Frank had no reply to this sally. There came a knock at the door, and Tommy called, Come in. I see you have fully recovered, said the smiling Theronian who entered at the bidding. We are overjoyed to know this. You have the gratitude of the entire realm for your part in the saving of our empress from the bullets of the madman. I do? Yes, you and your friend. And now, may I ask, are you ready to return to your own land? Sure thing. Or rather, I will be in a few minutes. Oh, wait, no, that's Tommy. Sure thing. Or rather, I will be in a few minutes. Thank you. We shall await you in the transmitting room. Magnus, bud, don't sit on that. It's not for a baby to sit upon. I should maybe put something up there so you don't sit there. If you're curious what that is behind me, it's an air filter. You know, it's good for my insides to have filtered air. It's a little loud, so it can't really run while we're reading here, but, you know. Definitely better than nothing. I will set these two to mind the air filter. Beryl the Bee here has his little eye mask that I borrow every now and again. Alright, Bee-Bert. Now, do we understand that that's busy? No, we don't. Sir, that's busy. Yeah, I know it's normally on. You still can't sit on it. Trust me, it's not worth it. I gotta come up with something for that. Anyway. Where were we? Transmitting room? Yes. Thank you. We shall await you in the transmitting room. The Theronian bowed and was gone. Well, I like that. He hands me an undeserved compliment and then asks how soon we can beat it. Here's your hat, what's your hurry kind of thing. Again, that's Tommy, wrong? Well, I like that. He hands me an undeserved compliment and asks how soon we can beat it. Here's your hat, what's your hurry kind of thing. It's me they're anxious to be rid of, remarked Frank, shrugging his broad shoulders. No, Magnus, don't stand on that. It is too delicate for beavers to stand upon. Here. Now there is no room for baby cat to stand. They can hang out back there. That's not the end of the world. Where was I? Oh yeah, it's me that they're anxious to be rid of, etc., etc. You bet it is, and I'm in favor of making it good and snappy. He completed his toilet as rapidly as possible, then turned to face the downhearted Frank. Uh, an aside, by the way, toilet here means like, the little preparatory things you do. We call it the toilet now because it was where you did your toilet, as in like, brush your teeth, wash your face, shave, smack some aftershave on your face, that kind of thing. We've also learned this in the reading of Dracula. Anyway. How do we go? The same way we came in? No, Tommy, they've closed off the shaft that led from the cavern of the Silver Dome. They're taking no more chances. It seems like the shaft down which we floated was constructed by the Theronians, not by Leland. They'd used it in the gravity disk to transport casual visitors to the surface, who occasionally mixed with our people in order to learn the languages of the upper world and to actually touch and handle the things they were otherwise able to see only through the medium of the Silver Dome and the crystal spheres. Further visits to the surface are now forbidden, were to be returned by a remarkable process of beam transmission of our disintegrated bodies. Disintegrated? Yes, it seems they've learned to disassociate the atoms of the human body that it's composing and transmit them to any desired point over a beam of etheric vibrations and then reassemble them in the original living condition. But what? You mean to say we're to be shot to the surface through the intervening rock and earth, disintegrated and reintegrated, will not even be bent, let alone busted? This time he was rewarded by a laugh. That's right. I've gone through the calculations with one of the Theronian engineers. I can't find any flaws in his scheme. We're safe in their hands. If you say so, Frank, it's okay with me. Let's go. Reluctantly, his friend lifted his athletic bulk from the chair. In silence, he led the way to the transmitting room of the Theronian scientists. Here they were greeted by two savants with whom Frank was already acquainted, Clairot and Ronus by name. A bewildering array of complex mechanisms was crowded into the high-ceilinged chamber, and prominent among them was one of the crystal spheres, this one of somewhat smaller size than the one in the palace of Phaestra. "Where do you wish to arrive?" asked Clerix. "As near to my automobile as possible," replied Frank, taking sudden interest in the proceedings. "It's parked in the lane between Leland's house and the road." Tommy looked quickly in his direction, encouraged by the apparent change in his attitude. The scientists proceeded to energize the crystal sphere. They were bent upon speeding the parting guests. Their beloved Empress was to be saved from her own emotions. Quick adjustments of the controls resulted in the locating of Frank's car, which was still buried to its axles in snow. The scene included Leland's house, or rather its site, for it appeared to have been utterly demolished by some explosion within. So, for context, for the listeners who are catching all of this live and haven't had the time to catch up, essentially, these two showed up to a partially abandoned house that was owned by this Leland character, who discovered, surprise, there's a subterranean society underneath his house that uses a remarkable silver dome to control the flow of gravity, and they have wild volumes of technology besides, apparently including teleporters, and they used this silver dome not only to control gravity but also to monitor all of the radio transmissions going on the surface. And so they're just like hanging out down there, and they're supposed to be like a superior society of slightly more evolved people who are just living their life down there. It's a whole thing. Definitely, if you are confused, go listen to the last episode where we kind of expand upon it a bit more. It's actually really neat. Anyway, Tommy raised questioning eyebrows. "It was necessary to destroy the house in obliterating all traces of our former means of egress. It has been commanded that you two be returned safely, and we are authorized to trust implicitly in your future silence regarding the existence of Theros. This is satisfactory, I presume?" Both Tommy and Frank nodded their agreement. "Are you ready, gentlemen?" asked Clairot, who was adjusting a mechanism that resembled a huge radio transmitter. Its 12 giant vacuum tubes glowed into life as he spoke. "We are," chimed the two visitors. They were requested to step onto a small circular platform that was raised about a foot from the floor by means of insulating legs. Above the table there was an inverted bowl of silver in the shape of a large parabolic reflector. "There will be no alarming sensations," averred Clarux. "When I close the switch, the disintegrating energy from the reflector above will bathe your bodies for a moment in visible rays of a deep purple hue. You may possibly experience a slight momentary feeling of nausea. Then, presto, you have arrived." "Well, shoot us then," growled Frank from the position on the stand. Clarix pulled the switch, and there was a murmur as of distant thunder. Tommy blinked involuntarily in all the brilliant purple glow that surrounded him. There was all confusion in the transmitting room. Someone had rushed through the opera door, shouting, "Frank! Frank!" It was the Empress Phaestra. In a growing daze, Tommy saw her dash to the platform, seizing Frank in a clutch of desperation. There was a violent wrench, as if some monster were twisting at his vitals. He closed his eyes against the blinding light, then realized the utter silence that had followed the erstwhile confusion came from him sitting in Frank's car, alone. The journey was over, and, well, Frank was left behind. With awful finality, it came to him there was nothing he could do. It was clear that Phaestra had wanted his pal, needed him, come for him even. From the fact that Frank remained behind, it was evident that she'd succeeded in retaining him. A sickening fear came to Tommy that she'd been too late, that Frank's body was already partly disintegrated, that he might have just paid the price of her love with his life, but a little reflection convinced him that if this were the case, a portion of his friend's body would have reached the intended destination. Then, unexplainably, he received a mental message that all was well. Considerably heartened at this, he pressed the starter button, and the cold motor of Frank's coupe turned over slowly, protestingly. Finally, it coughed a few times, and after considerable coaxing by use of the choke, ran smoothly. He proceeded to back carefully through the drifts toward the road, casting an occasional regretful glance in the direction of the demolished mansion. He'd have some explaining to do when he returned to New York. Perhaps, well, yes, almost certainly, he'd be questioned by the police regarding Frank's disappearance, but he would never betray the trust of Phaestra. Who indeed would believe him if he told the story? Instead, he would concoct a weird fabrication regarding an explosion in Leland's laboratory of his own miraculous escape. They couldn't hold him, couldn't accuse him of murder without producing a body, the corpus delicti or whatever they called it. Anyway, Frank was content, so was Phaestra. Tommy swung the heavy car into the road and turned toward New York, alone and lonely, but somehow happy, at least happy for his friend. You know, this does make me wonder, now that we've come to the end of this, there's a little, blurb that says, "Astounding Stories appears on newsstands the first Thursday in each month." You know, I've been keeping an eye on Analog lately, and their publishing. They've gone to a bi-monthly publishing model. I wonder if they stuck with the first Thursday for the nostalgia of it all. Analog science fiction. Let's find out here. Analog Science Fiction, in fact, publishes once bi-weekly. When, though? Does it say? It does not say. Wait a minute. Yeah, on sale until 2/13. Yeah, but that doesn't tell me when it first published, though. Yeah, you're not gonna tell me? You're not gonna tell me when this first went up? Huh? Current issue. DDDDD. No dates? No dates, huh? No dates? No dates at all? No dates at all. That's rude. Well, it doesn't seem to publish on the first Thursday of every month anyway. Because, like, that seems like the type of thing you do just kind of for the nostalgia of it. It's like, oh, we've shifted to a bi-monthly model, but we're still publishing the first Thursday of every other month. But they're publishing the January and February issue right now, so who knows? I've actually got on those bookshelves behind me a small collection of analog. It's slightly out of frame, I think. You can see up to here. No, you can see up to here. This one. Oh, you can only see the CDs. Yeah, there's another rack of movies, and then there's some. We started on books, and that is where my analog issues are. I need to like, you know, handle them and actually read more of them because there's really good stuff in there. It's not just the public domain issues that are really interesting. But I digress. Ooh, Earth the Marauder, part two of a three-part novel. It's been a long time since we read the first part of this, if I remember right. This was all the way to the beginning of the last season. But Earth the Marauder by Arthur J. Burks. We're on part 2 of 3. Very interesting. Where is... Oh, over there. Okay. Let's get started, shall we? The Earth was dying. Oh, it's this one with Sarka and the control over the turn of the Earth. Yeah, I remember this one. Anyway, the Earth was dying. Ever since Sarka the First, king of the scientists, had given them mankind the secret of life, which prolonged life indefinitely, the Earthlings had multiplied beyond all count, and had been forced to burrow deep into the ground and high into the air, in the desperate search for more room in which to live. There was much civil war. The plight of the children of men was desperate. Something. Oh. Excuse me. Sorry. Something had to be done. Then Sarka the Third called the spokesmen of the gens of Earth around him and proposed to them a new scheme which had come to him in his laboratory atop the Himalayas. He would swing the Earth from its orbit, send careening through space toward the moon, there to destroy its inhabitants and supplant them with a colony of Earthlings, and then they would surge on to Mars. One by one, the 12 spokesmen, each the head and representative of the teeming trillions comprising his gens, acceded. Even Dali, the jealous rival of Sarka, finally gave his sullen consent. What's up? Come on, library.
Sorry, maybe once the door was closed.
There. Everybody welcome. Everyone's favorite co-host. Come up here, library. Hey, Bebert. Oh, disconnected. That's not allowed.
That gives me a good time to go like this.
Library. Come here, bud. While the stream's down. Come here. Come on. Love you too. Library. Come here, bud. Hey. You wanna come sit with Dad? Hey. Library. It's like, no, I sniffing. Come here, man. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come here, baby. Baby boy. Little baby boy. Little itty bitty man. Little bitty kitty committee. The leader of the itty bitty kitty committee. Nobody can see you. Nobody can see you right now, huh, Bert? What a little man. Okay, library. You want to stay on my lap? Now's a good time for it. I'll keep petting you. Anyway, Dali, the jealous rival of Sarka, finally gave his sullen consent. And so, under Sarka's commands, the Earth hordes were mobilized, and in tune with the master barrel in Sarka's laboratory, all the barrels of the Earth vibrated, freeing the Earth from her age-old orbit and swinging her out toward the moon. The gens of Dali, the trillions of people who swore allegiance to him, would lead the attack on the moon. When within 50,000 miles, they darted out, clad in only their tight green clothing and the helmets that held the anti-gravitational ovoids, which neutralized gravity for them and enabled them to instantly fly where they willed. Their only weapons were hand atom disintegrators. And out from the moon came mysterious air cars with long, clutching tentacles, the weapons of the moon's minions. The War of the Worlds had begun. Yet, Dali, leader of the gens that now engaged the moon's air cars, was still in the laboratory with Sarka, for Dali's treacherous mind coveted control of the Earth, and though the urge to lead his gens into battle was tremendous, still he stayed, watching Sarka closely, waiting for the moment when he could trick Sarka and assume control. And at the head of the gens of Dali was a woman, Yaska, whom Sarka loved. The moon's air car swept away the gens of Dali, and out from the earth poured the gens of Cleric, who was Yaska's father. The newcomers fought desperately to save Yaska from the deadly clutches of the air cars, and Dali could stand it no longer. He sped forth from the laboratory to reorganize his beaten gens. Yaska flew for home, but behind her a single air car, splashed with crimson, reached forth its tentacles to clutch her, and Sarka groaned with agony of his impotence to help the woman that he loved. Chapter 11. Escape and Dali's Laughter. But Sarka was not to be so easily beaten. There still remained an infinite number of possible changes of speed by manipulation of ovidium by vibration set up by the barrels, without which this flight from the beginning would have been impossible. But for 2 hours, while the white-robed men of Cleric fought against the cars of crimson splashes to prevent the capture of the daughter of their spokesman, and died by the hundreds in the grip of those grim tentacles, Sarka was forced to labor with the barrels until perspiration bathed his whole body, and his heart was heavy as he foresaw failure, and failure meant death, or worse, for Yaska. But at the end of 2 hours, while the men of Cleric fought like men inspired against the air car of the crimson slashes, a cessation in the outward speed of the earth could be noted. At the end of 3 hours, the body of Yaska, all the time fighting manfully to maintain the landing place of the earth, was at last blinking larger. But the tentacles of the air car were groping after her, reaching for her, striving to catch and clasp her to her death. The two Sarkas watched and prayed while the might of the barrels, traveling at top speed, fought against the force of whatever was used by the moon men to compel the moon to withdraw. Still, the men of Cleric fought that single car, and died by the hundreds in the fighting. White-robed figures which became shriveled and black in the grip of those tentacles. Countless of the men of Cleric deliberately cast themselves against the tentacles, throwing their lives away to give Yaska more leeway in her race for life. Will she make it, father? If the courage and the loyalty of her people stand for anything, she will make it. On she came at top speed, and now, through the microtelescopes, the Sarkas could see the agony of effort on her face, even through the smooth mask used by the people of Earth for flight into space, where there was no atmosphere. Courage was there, and the will of never say die, and Yaska, moreover, was coming back to the man she loved. In a nebulous sort of way, Sarka realized this, for though those two had not mated, there was a resonant inner sympathy between them that had rounded into an emotion of overpowering force, since Yaska had proved to Sarka she was to be trusted, that he'd been something less than a faithful lover when he had mistrusted her ever so little. Closer now, and closer still, at last the air car of the crimson splashes was drawing away, losing in the race for its life. It was falling back as though minded to turn about and race back for the moon, now a ball in the sky, far away, the outlines of its craters growing dim and misty with distance. Now the men of Cleric, those who remained, were breaking contact with the air car and forming a valiant rearguard for the retreat of the Yaska. Throughout the Earth, as the barrels fought with ever-increasing speed to lower the rate of the Earth's outward race from the moon, was such a trembling, such a vibration induced by conflicting alien forces as there'd not ever been in that moment when it was back there in its orbit. The Earth could have been either kept within its orbit or hurled outward into space at the touch of a finger. Now Yaska, surrounded by her father's men, was almost close enough to touch the Earth. She made it, weak and weary, and rested for a moment while her father's men steadied her. Then, thrusting them aside, with gestures bidding them return to their glens, she lifted into the air again and fled straight for the laboratory of Sarka. She entered tiredly through the exit dome, and all but collapsed in the arms of Sarka. Gently he removed her helmet of the anti-gravitational ovoid, noting as she leaned against him the tumultuous beating of her heart. Then her gentle eyes opened, and she whispered to Sarka, "You trust me now?" For answer, he bent and kissed her softly on the lips, for the kiss from the far distant time when the first baby was kissed by the first mother had been the favored caress of mankind. Her face was transfigured as she read his answer in his eyes and the touch of his lips. Then, remembering, fear flashed across her face. She straightened and grasped Sarka by the hand, hurrying him into the observatory. She took the seat in which Dali had sat before he'd gone out to take command of his gens, studied for many minutes the battle in space between the alien worlds. "Dali is winning, apparently." "The qualification is a just one, apparently indeed. You will note now, though men of the gens of Dali swarm all about the air cars, and even clamber atop them, no more dying in the grasp of those tentacles. Is Dali arranging a treacherous truce with the moon men?" "I have been wondering about that, for it is my belief that nothing not conducive to his own selfish interests would have forced Dali to leave this place and take command of his gens as I had first ordered, unless he had schemes planned of which father and I could know nothing. Now that I think of it, Yaska, how did Dali know our secret code of fingers?" Yaska started and turned a blanched face to Sark. "Did he know? Did he? If he did, that proves a suspicion I've entertained since that first moment when Dali swept into the fight, and I sensed that alien signals were being flashed back and forth." "Slashed back and forth? What do you mean? How do you mean that Dali was able to somehow communicate with the moon men in their own language, or through their own signals?" "Why not? He knew our secret code, did he not? I never gave it to him. I know that you did not. No, Dali has some means never discovered or suspected by you, Sarkis, whereby he's able to understand alien languages and alien sign manuals even." "That means," said Sarka the Elder in a dread voice, "that by forcing Dali to go out at the head of his gens—" "We have," interrupted the Sarka the Younger, "placed a new weapon of treason in his hands. Dali, at the very moment of contact with the air cars loaded with moon men, broke in on their signals. They must have had some means of signaling one another, and communicated with him in his own way. Do you think it possible that with all his gens he may go over to the moon men, form an alliance with them?" For many moments no one dared to answer the question, yet from what Sarkis knew of him it was not impossible at all. For Dali was the master egoist always, and never overlooked an opportunity to gain something for himself. It was Yaska who broke the silence. "Did you note carefully those air cars which were partially destroyed by our ray directors and atom disintegrators? Did you note that no men formed like our own, no creatures of any sort whatsoever fell from the cars?" Again came the awesome silence, and the keen brains of the Sarkis wrestled with this vague hint of the uncanny. "You mean, Yaska, you mean that the occupants of the air cars are part of the cars, but beings of the moon? They're either metal monsters endowed with brains, or tiny creatures irrevocably attached to the cars themselves. But how are we to be sure? I can understand what Dali might do if the moon men granted his wish for an alliance with them. It's easy to understand why his gens would follow his lead, for with the moon forced outward from the earth faster than his gens could retreat, there is but one direction for his gens to go, toward the moon. They would go to the moon as captives, and trust the keen brain of Dali to gain the mastery sooner or later over the moon men, and then... Well, then, Dali has already been inspired by the speed with which those air cars travel. You will remember that he did not take kindly to leaving the earth and making his abode on some other planet. But why could he not do so? Combine forces and knowledge with the people of that planet, and then return to Earth in alliance with them. After we've depleted our forces by placing a large portion of our people on Mars and Venus and Saturn. Sarka, my son, said Sarka's father, before we continue with our flight to Mars, we must know the truth. We must somehow learn exactly what is going on the moon. If you could reach the moon alone, undetected, and bring back a report. For a moment, he left it there, and the faces of all three were gray with worry and abysmal fear. I can't go bodily, father, but you remember my secret exit dome to the right of the observatory, from which I have never yet dared exit from this place, for fear that it might cost me my life? Sarka the Elder nodded, while Yaska looked puzzled. Other evidence of the fact that Sarka had not always trusted her, for she knew nothing of said secret exit dome. Sarka's eyes, while he looked at Yaska, mutely asked for her forgiveness, which she gave him with her smile. I remember, son, now. Surely it's worth risking one's life to know what the new menace looming over the children of men is. Well, what's the use of the secret dome? It's merely an elaboration of the regular exit dome, combined with certain phases of our atom disintegrators and the principle involved in the anti-gravitational ovoids. I will step into that secret exit dome, garbed for flight outside, and will appear myself to, I will myself to appear bodily in a certain place. It's instantaneous. I step into the dome, and, for example, will myself to appear whole upon the moon, and there I will appear. You mean, during this period of transportation, you're invisible? Yes, invisible because non-existent except for the essential elements of me are broken down by the secret exit dome, reassembled at the place willed in their entirety. I can't fly there. A million eyes would see me approach. I must go in secret as a spy, wearing the clothing and insignia of a member of the gens of Dali. Silence in the observatory for a brief breathing space. Oh, you can hear that barking. That's been in the background for the past 38 minutes. Lovely. We love it here. Hang on just a moment. Well, let me finish this. Silence in the observatory for a brief breathing space, and then Yaska spoke that speech out of the books of antiquity, which remains the classic expression of loyalty. Whithersoever thou goest, there I will go also. From the laboratory came a sudden burst of laughter, the laughter which all three recognized as the laughter of Dali. But when they entered the place of the revolving barrel, there was no one there, and a feeling of dread all-encompassing held them thralled for the space of several heartbeats. Dali, they knew, was thousands of miles away upon the moon, yet here in the place of the master barrel they all three had just heard his sardonic laughter. Before we dive into chapter 12 here, I'm going to shut my window in hopes that it shuts that dog up. I didn't know y'all could hear that, and I'm very sorry. Doesn't muffle that near as much as I was hoping it would. You know that? You don't need to be barking, Duke. Why does it sound like this window is still open? Oh, because the window isn't. The window doesn't sit correctly. Love it here. Well, that'll have to do. Anyhow, that did muffle it a great deal. Oh, that'll have to do. For now. Anyway, where was I? Ah, we were about to start chapter 12. Ashes of the Moon. Through the micro-telescopes, it was possible to see what had happened after Dali had assumed command of the gens of Dali. For even though the moon, in spite of the speed of the barrels, was being forced further and further from the earth, the eyes of the micro-telescopes picked out and enlarged the details to such an extent that the battle seemed to be transpiring under the eyes of the beholders. A terrific jumble, in which earthlings and air cars were all tumbled together in mad chaos, a great mass of writhing green-garbed figures, infinite in number, in the midst of which were the gigantic air cars, like monster beetles being beset by armies upon armies of ants. And then, by the time Yaska had seated herself in the observatory atop the Himalayas to watch what had developed, the battle seemed to be over, and the moon men they had won, for the huge cars swung around between the myriads of the gens of Dali, and seemed to be herding them toward the moon as though they were prisoners. Telepathically, Sarkar and his father had been able to catch some hint of the thoughts of the earthlings in battle, and these thoughts had been tinged with doubt, fear, and horror, so that even thus to receive them by mental telepathy was to feel the searing heat of their fear. Now, in the instant when the battle in space seemed to be over, and the gens of Dali were prisoners, the thought waves were no more, and a brooding silence took their place. Dali, the Sarkis knew, possessed the power to mask his thoughts, for it was a power possessed in common by all the scientists of the earth. But the common people of his gens did not possess that power. However, for the moment, Sarka had forgotten an all-important something, that when people were outside the roof of the world, they were subservient to the will of a common commander to whom they had sworn allegiance. If, therefore, Dali could mask his own thoughts from the brains of men, he could also mask the thoughts of the people of his gens merely by willing it. So Sarka and his father and Yaska could not know whether the gens of Dali had gone over in a body with him in a truce with the people of the moon, or whether they were dual prisoners of Dali and of the moon men. More than ever it was necessary for someone to somehow reach the moon and make a thorough investigation, discover just what Dali was doing, what mischief he was hatching. And the secret exit dome, that seemed to be the answer. "You can manage without me, father?" The elder Sarka nodded. "Of all the other spokesmen of Earth, I trust Gerd the most. Might I suggest you bring him here, trust him in all the details, and let him take my place wherever possible? Or better still, keep Yaska here with you. I may not always be able to return. I'll try to find a way, but we can communicate we can always communicate telepathically. Telepathically, even. Yaska. Yaska," said that young little lady grimly. "Yaska," said the young lady grimly, "goes with Sarka wherever Sarka goes." "But it may mean death. We can only guess at the cunning of the moon dwellers. They may have been in secret communication with Dali for centuries. Dali, who somehow discovered a secret finger code, may also know of this secret exit dome and the principle on which it operates. If he does, he may know how to combat it. Perhaps that explains his laughter. Perhaps he heard and understood every word we spoke. Hears and understands every word we speak now. Who knows, he may wait until I have passed through the secret exit dome, then make it impossible for me to be reincarnated on the moon or elsewhere. No matter, said Yaska softly. Wherever Sarka goes, there goes Yaska. It is useless to attempt to dissuade me, and it's time you learned that. In spite of himself, Sarka smiled, and his father met his smile with a quizzical one of his own. Both men had the same thought. Eternal woman, said Sarka the elder. No man has ever understood her, no man ever will, and all men are ruled by her. Sarka shrugged at this, and Yaska spoke again. Don't you think it's time we tried this new experiment? Sarka nodded, and his face was suddenly alight with the excitement which burned within him. First, we need accoutrement of the gens of Dali for 2 people. Yaska smiled. Foreseeing that we might have had need of such equipment, I had several complete outfits sent here when I took charge of the Yens of Dali as its spokesman. 2 minutes later, arrayed in the green clothing of the House of Dali, swathed in it from neck to toe, wearing their belts and the masks which were necessary to life in space, where there was no atmosphere, the whole topped by the gleaming helmets whose skull pans held the infinitesimally small anti-gravitational ovoids, Yaska and Sarka entered the secret exit dome side by side. On the breast and back of each there showed the yellow stars of the Yens of Dali. There was no hiding their identity otherwise, and if any of the gens saw them, both would be immediately recognized, for Yaska had commanded the gens, and Sarka was the world's greatest scientist, known to every human being, but they planned on carrying out their investigations by stealth. Father, when the inner door is closed upon us, you have but to press the button to the right of the door. Press it when the light beside it grows red, which will indicate that we've willed ourselves to go to a certain destination. The inner door closed upon Sarka and Yaska, and, hand in hand, side by side, their bodies glowing with the knowledge of warm, sympathetic contact, they waited for a miracle which had never been before attempted. Are you afraid, beloved? When I am with you, I have no fear. Then face the outer door, and will to go wherever I will take to you. Side by side, hand in hand still, they faced the outer door, and Sarka willed, let us appear together in a deserted spot, within sight but unseen of the moon crater from which those air cars were sent against us. A sudden blur, a cessation of all knowledge, and then Sarka and Yaska stood side by side in a desolate expanse surrounded by bleak and appalling mountains of grotesque shape, in a light that was weirdly, awesomely blue. Their feet were invisible, deeply coated in some soft, fine material which looked like snow. After a swift glance around to see if anything lived or moved in this awful desolation, Sarka stooped and picked up some of the fine stuff with his fingers, touching it to his lips. The material seemed to be fine blue ashes, and on his tongue it had a soapy savor. He peered at Yaska, whose eyes were glowing with excitement, whose lips were parted with anticipation, and instantly he opened a mental conversation with her. We must speak with each other telepathically, but do not speak with me until I have explained to you how to mask your thoughts from all persons, save the one with whom you hold converse. First, I love you. Second, and let us see if, searching the sky, we can find the earth. In a few brief, technical words, Sarka told his beloved how to talk with him in the manner which he had never before explained to her. They'd used telepathy before, countless times, but they'd not cared who heard. While even now, secrecy in all things was the prime essential for success, even for life. When he had told her, and she replied, I understand perfectly. Seems quite easy. They turned and surveyed the heavens, out of which this new miracle of the secret exit dome they had dropped to the face of the moon. Away across the space between worlds, its transfiguration plainly visible to the two, they could make out and identify the world from which they had come. Save that they knew themselves standing on the moon, they would have thought that as far as appearances went, that the place they had come was the moon, many times enlarged. It seemed incredible they'd come so far in the twinkling of an eye, but that they had was proved by the fact of their physical presence. Look, Yaska, see how our earth glows as though it was a fire inside? They stared at the great circular yellowish flame that he pointed out, and Sarka, always the scientist whose science was one of the exactness, tried to estimate just where on the earth's surface the glow was. Yaska, that glow comes out of the heart of the Gens area which Dali ruled, and no one lives there since Dali's Gens flew out to do battle. That's why we did not know of it before we left. That glow, somehow, beloved, is the cause of the outward from the earth journey of the moon. First, we must locate the moon source of that glow and render it incapable of forcing itself further away. For do you realize that unless we do so, we'll never again see home? One moment, my friends. I have received a dispatch on my cellular telephone. Oh, yeah. Oh, that was just from. Okay, I thought they had sent the group chat that, but I was like, whatever. Sorry, that was actually important. One of my roommates also has a cat, and library is a little over eager for affection involving this cat. He's just like, pay attention to me. Let's goof. Let's hang out. And Juno is fully uninterested. So, Juno being the cat, they're slowly socializing to each other. But in the meanwhile, we have to contain the lads every now and again. And probably Friday nights for paper cuts is one of many great times for that. Ah, water. Always a good thing to drink. Anyway, we've got a little more time. Where was I? Forcing further away. That's where we were. Yaska said nothing, but her eyes were troubled for a moment. Then she smiled again. And what care I if I become a prisoner on the moon if you're with me? Sarko was just now realizing the wonder of this raven-haired woman whom, knowing her for half a century as he had known just so little after all. We seem in danger of discovery, Yaska. Drop down instantly into the ashes, for if we were discovered by Dali. He left it there, and with a deep intake of breath started away for the nearest and highest hill. They desired to walk, yet found walking almost impossible, as they could not keep their feet on the ground save by the exercise of a really incredible effort of will. So, despairing of keeping their feet in contact with the ashes, they flew just above them, heading for the nearest weird-looking ridge. See, I forgot they had, like, controllable anti-gravity fields for a hot second. I was like, wait, how are they staying on the ground? You can't do that. Like, you step and you, like, boing on the moon, but, like, they have controllable anti-gravity, so, you know. Actually, you know what else? I forgot to mention some of our new Igloo members. We got a few of those in the intervening time because it was a hot minute. Welcome to the Igloo, Neo Gabby, Kaveldin, Index Page, and Spunky Heart. I'm happy to have all of you here, and I'm sorry that I did not welcome you in properly as you were following. I was getting email about it. Actually, you know what? I'm not sure my alerts have caught everyone. I think I got another one recently. Let me double check my email while I'm thinking about it. Yeah, Egret13, you're new. You're not there.
Yeah, Egret 13 isn't on the page. And then, like, there was one more, too.
Yeah, Sovlaki also followed. That's weird. I'll have to fix my alerts. That's very strange.
Savlaki, welcome to the igloo. And then that's everybody. Okay, yeah. It was bothering me. I was looking at those and I'm like,
Well, we forgot to call out somebody, but like, we also had a few followers that are not up there. I'll have to hassle my stream elements a little bit. Anyway, the book we're reading, remember that? In the strange light, which was oddly like moonlight in the painted desert of Earth, shapes were distorted and somehow menacing. Colors were raw and almost bleeding, and distances that seemed but a step required hours to traverse. Ever and anon, as they traveled, they looked back up at the earth which was their home. It was still visible, though plainly smaller with distance, and for a time Sarka's heart misgave him, but he only clasped tighter the hand of Yaska and moved on. They were just at the base of the first hill, which had now become a mountain of gloomy, forbidding aspect, when the first sound that they heard on the moon came to them. A sound that was a commingling of the laughter of Dali, the barking of jackals of the olden times, the humming of a million barrels revolving at top speed, and a strident buzzing as never had either heard. Had they been discovered? Was that sound a warning? They couldn't know, but as they stared at the crest of the hill, two long, snaky, waving things appeared above the crest of it, undulating, waving to and fro, as though questing for something. They crouched low in the white ashes at the base of the mountain, and waited, scarcely breathing. For a long time, Sarka and Yaska remained still. Sorry, let's try that again. Chapter 13, The Lunar Cubes. For a long time, Sarka and Yaska remained still, like sentinels, listening to the strange discord which seemed to emanate from behind the hill at whose base they crouched. Oh, my chat command didn't work, but there's supposed to be a bot that responds to the fact that there's a Discord command in chat. There is a Discord. I'm not sure why. I think Stream Elements is just straight up not working right now, which is very frustrating. I'll have to look at it. Anyway. Look, said Sarka at last. There against the sky, beyond and between those two waving tentacles. Note the column of light scarcely lighter than the light which surrounds it everywhere. It looks like a massive column, just lighter than everything around it, yet so little lighter that you have to watch closely to see it at all. Yaska stared for all of a minute before she thought back her answer. I see it. Now note whether it goes as it reaches outward into space. Yaska followed the mighty height of the thing, outward, and then gasped. Sarka, its end touches the earth in the very heart of that strange glow we spoke about. Exactly, and the people of Earth know nothing about it, because it's invisible to them. It is only from outside that the glow it makes against the earth is visible. If we can divert its direction, or render it useless in any way, the moon will no longer be thrust away by its force. A pause of indecision, then Sarka thought again. Let us go, Yaska. Keep right behind me, right on my heels. Slowly, fighting against something that seemed determined to pull or hurl them outward from the surface of the moon with each forward movement they made, they essayed the side of the hill, pausing at the end of what seemed like hours in a sort of hollow just large enough to mask their bodies, and started over its edge into one of the craters of the moon. Out of the depths of that crater came those discordant sounds, which now were almost deafening, and out of that crater, too, came the almost invisibly bluish column whose outer tip touched the earth. Right before them, so close that they all but rested in its shadow, was one of those monster air cars, its tentacles moving to and fro as though wafted into motion by some vagrant breeze. But since neither Sarka nor Yaska could feel the breeze, Sarka knew that it was life which caused the waving motion of those tentacles of terror. Tentacles of Terror would be a great band name, actually. Note, he said to Yaska, there's a tiny trapdoor in the bottom of the air car. That thing rests on a half-dozen of those tentacles. I see. Note the gleaming thing on the ground right below the air car? I wonder what that is. They studied the thing there, which seemed to be a huge jewel of some sort, that glittered balefully in the eerie light of the moon. Hang on. Internet cut out. We're waiting around. Apparently my internet provider is very upset that I am doing this. Come on. Stay connected. Can't have nothing. Can't have nothing nice, can we? Come on. Connect to the internet. Don't be doing this. Don't be doing this. Connect. This is the second time tonight. I moved into an apartment so I would have stable internet. I can't believe you do this. Come on. I will stop the stream and just record. I'm not kidding. I know that's kind of like, that's very brusque about it, but like, I'm not playing this game. I live in a building. We paid the internet bill today. Don't play me like this. No, don't disconnect. Connect. No, stop. Stop doing that. Give me the internet. Can't believe you do this. There we go. Now we should come back. In about 2 seconds. 1 and connected. There we were. Hope you all didn't miss too much. I stopped reading while the internet was down. Anyway, they studied the thing there, which seemed to be a huge jewel of some sort that glittered balefully in the eerie light of the moon. It was, perhaps, twice the size of an average man's torso, and was almost exactly cubical in shape. As Sarka studied the thing, he sensed that the feeling flowed out of it, that the cube, whatever it was alive. He tore his glance away from it, and realized that he accomplished the feat with a distinct effort of will, as though the cube had willed him to hold his gaze, knew that he was there. His eyes, peering around the inner scope of the crater, which dipped over some hundreds of feet down, plunged downward to some unknown depth, noted a broad, flat stone off to his right, and around the rim of the crater he counted a full 100 of the air cars, all with their tentacles waving as though they belonged to sentient creatures. Yeah, sorry about the interruption there, gang. Hopefully there's a lot less of those. Because if there's more of them, I'm gonna be real miffed. Or we'll have to start streaming from the living room. Sit on top of the... There is a couch in that living room, actually. Just sit on the couch that's practically on top of the wireless internet router. I goof, but honestly, if everybody else didn't mind, it might be worth considering. I'll think about it. Anyway, the sentient creature tentacles. Below each one, as he studied them and strained his eyes to make out details, he caught the baleful gleam of other cubes like that first one he'd seen. The air cars, it seemed, were either sentinels at the lip of the crater, or were the dwelling places of sentinels, and those cubes were the sentinels. It seemed absurd, but it came to Sarka in a flash that was the answer, and his eyes came back to the first cube because it was nearer and easier to study. I will not be swayed by the will of the thing, Sarka told himself, nor will I allow it to analyze me. Yaska, do you do likewise? Beside him, Yaska shivered. He turned to look at her. Her face was cold white, her eyes huge with terror and fascination, as she stared at that first cube resting so balefully there under the first air car. He shook her, and she seemed to bring her eyes to his with a terrific will-straining effort. Look at me. Keep your eyes on me. To look at the cube spells danger. he told her telepathically. But his own eyes went back to the thing, and he studied it closely. A cold chill raced through his body as he noted its gleam was becoming dull, fading slowly out. It had gleamed brightly at first, but now it was losing its sheen, fading away to invisibility. He thought he should be able, regardless of gleam or color, to see its outline, but its outline too seemed to be becoming faint, indistinct even. Then, in a trice, it was gone, and a feeling of uneasiness, more compelling than he'd ever known before, coursed through the soul of Sarka. Where'd that cube gone? What was it? What was its purpose? He tore his eyes away from the spot where he'd last seen it, and stared away to the shadow beneath the second nearest air car, where he'd glimpsed another of the cubes. That cube, too, was fading out. Sarka, look, came to his brain the thoughts of Yaska. Sarka looked and turned and stared at her, and a feeling of fear for which he could not account took fast hold of him. The eyes of Yaska, wide and staring as they had been when he commanded her to look away from the cube under the air car, were staring at that flat, table-like rock off to his right. There, almost in the center of the rock, a gleaming something was taking shape. Just a dull spot in the center of the yellow glow, then the beginning of the outline of a cube, then all at once the cube itself gleaming and baleful. Sarka gasped in terror. He'd seen the cube vanish, its glow disappear, and now here it was, almost close enough to touch, on a rock beside him, gleaming and baleful as before. That it was the same cube that he'd seen under the first air car, he somehow knew without being told. That it was a sentient thing he also knew, for now there was no mistaking the fact that, but for the presence in the little hollow of Yaska and Sarka, the cube would not have moved. This author seems to really love the term baleful. For those of you who don't know what baleful means, I think I can tell it to... I use a dictionary here. Dictionary. Baleful, as in threatening harm or menacing. You know, you could say baleful, menacing, threatening. Even, something along the lines of terror-inducing. Baleful, baleful, baleful. I mean, it is baleful, it's threatening them, but, there are more words than baleful. If you took a drink every time they said baleful in the last chunk of this chapter, you'd be pretty hydrated. A drink of water, to clarify. Swift as light, Sarka's right hand darted to his belt, where his ray director should be nestled against his need of it. And with his first movement, the cube's brilliance vanished instantly, cube disappearing, and appearing again right before the face of Sarka, so close he could touch it. Yet he did not turn the ray director against it. No. Ooh. Yet he did not turn the ray director against it. Nor did he extend his hand and touch the thing. Because he was afraid to do so. Excuse me, I have... There it is, hiccups. And take a drink, I mean, hydrate. I'm just gonna do this. Oh, that's not helping. I'm gonna try to keep reading. We'll see. I might have to take a moment and kind of stand up and jiggle around a little bit to see once if I can get rid of these hiccups. Even as the cube appeared before his eyes, thrice baleful and menacing in its close proximity, his eyes darted back to that broad, flat rock where the second gleaming cube now appeared. Hang on. Everybody say it with me. I am not a fish.
I am not a fish. I am not a fish. Not at all. I am not a fish. I have lungs in my body. I do not need to be using my gill reflexes. I don't have those. Alright, fine. None of my fun home remedies worked for hiccups, so we're just gonna read. We're just gonna read, and every time I hiccup, I'm gonna reread a line. Because I'm sick of waiting around. Waiting around for these darn hiccups. Great God, Yaska, what does it mean? These are moon soldiers. These are moon soldiers, and unless we manage to not appear furtive, we're undone. Still, Sarka made no other move, while other gleaming cubes appeared on the flat rock. 5 other cubes appeared beside the first at the rim. 5 other cubes appeared beside the first at the rim of the hollow which held the forms of Yaska and Sarka. The cubes were closing in on them, oddly like a squad of earthlings in the olden times, advancing by rushes against an entrenched enemy. The cubes were closing in on them, oddly like a squad of earthlings in the olden times, advancing by rushes against an entrenched enemy. The cubes were closing in on them, oddly like a squad of earthlings in the olden times, advancing by rushes against an... God dang it! The cubes were closing in on them, oddly like a squad of earthlings in the olden times, advancing by rushes against an entrenched enemy. Kariki says, look at the bright side, we don't leave a trail of poop like goldfish. It's true. I would not trade hiccups for leaving a trail of little poop pellets. That sounds like an unpleasant experience. What you can't see is Magnus cleaning library. He was reaching down and giving library a couple little cleans while he was asleep, and library just reached up and said, "No, don't clean me." And it's so funny because he really only cleans library to like warm up his little tongue so that he can clean himself. Now, boys, we've discussed tussling at great length. If you're gonna tussle, 1, you can't do it while the camera's on. That's bad luck. 2, you can't do it where Dad can see. Okay? Yeah. There's this whole this whole human-sized bed you guys can lay on. Take it easy, huh? Why don't you just settle in? There we are. We're settling in. No more posturing, only low. The buzzing sound which they had first heard now seemed accentuated, but instead of being outside of the listeners, seemed inside them, hammering against their very brains. Messages were being sent to them, passed back and forth between and among the cube men about. Messages were being sent to them, or passed back and forth between and among the cube men about them, and they hadn't the slightest idea how to make answer, know whether an answer was expected of them, or know what the cube men thought about them. Since there was nothing else to do, they laid there, hands clasped as children in the dark. Since there was nothing else to do, they lay there, hands clasped as children in the dark clasp hands, and waited for what might transpire. This out of context sounds like I am a skipping disc man. Like every time I hiccup, it's the bus hitting a bump like you're taking the bus to work and I'm skipping skipping because the bus goes over a bump and the case for the CD player only extends so far, and so thunk, and then I thunk. You know what I mean? Oh, that one hurt a little bit. That was not fun. I mean, hey, I got a good clean hiccup sample there. That's fun. Maybe write down the uptime on that one. Oh. Oh. God dang it. I hate when I get the hiccups during a reading stream, is especially egregious. Like if I'm playing a game, I can just clam up and hiccup while I play the video game. But like I'm reading. Anyway. Ugh. Save all the hiccups and remix it to Baby Sharp. I was actually saving like all my at one point during like throughout season 1 of Paper Cuts, every time I sneezed, every time I like sneezed or like clicked my fingers to let me know that there's a point in the track, or like made a really loud obnoxious breathing sound, or like started talking to the cats, I cut that out. Or like yawns, actually. I have for the majority, oh my goodness, for the majority of season 1 of Paper Cuts, just the yawns, the yawns and like the hiccups. I was hoping if I yawned real big, that would stop them. Uh, and if I ever get large enough to have a Patreon, that's going to be one of the Patreon rewards is hiccup compilation. But that's a ways down the road. Oh my goodness. I am not a fish. I have lungs. I would like to use my lungs, please. Oh. I'm about to just head to intermission. But I'm gonna keep trying. Suddenly, the discord from inside the crater ceased, and all was still, while it came to Sarka that the cube men who stood before him were in grim communication with something invisible to Sarka and Yaska. Somebody, perhaps deep in the bowels of the moon, over inside the crater. They knew, those two, that the cube soldiers were reporting their presence and asking instructions. That the moon had gone silent to listen, and that within a few moments their fate would be decided. What should they do? In his hand, Sarka held his ray director, with which he knew he could blast one or all of the cubes into nothingness, but still he held his hand, made no move. Something, however, had to be done, for the discord was starting again, growing in volume. It made Sarka think, oddly enough, of a deaf-mute fighter.
It made Sarka think, oddly enough, of a deaf mute fighting for speech. Then came the first intelligible sound. A burst from the depths of the crater of sardonic laughter. "Dali," said Sarka, and moved. While Sarka moved, Yaska held fast to his arm, casting her fear to the winds, furious because of the laughter of Dali. Sarka thrust his ray director back into his belt and stood upright. See, now the hiccups have ascended beyond like annoyance, and now they're getting funny to me because they've been going on for long enough. Maybe if I wiggled around with a mouthful of water. Nope. Out of the crater, out of the crater there came no sound of heavy objects striking, though Sarka felt there should have, for the cubes were almost as heavy as a man. Then his hair almost stood on end under his helmet, for under that first air car where he had first seen it, the initial cube was again gleaming into life. The thing had dissolved while being hurled over the rim, and reformed in its proper place, its station as a silent sentinel under the air car. These cubes, then, were indeed sentinels impossible to injure even. Though no force had been used against Sarka and Yaska, Sarka had the feeling that they were powerless, and that here on the edge of the crater of the moon, awful forces were being mustered against them. Mustered slowly, sluggishly, yet surely, as though the mentality which mustered them knew them helpless, and that there was no use to hurry. As for Yaska, she merely clung to Sarka and waited, trusting him no matter what might transpire. On a blind chance, Sarka brought out his ray director again, turned its muzzle toward that invisibly blue column, pressed with his fingers, and moved the director back and forth. Instantly, the blue column seemed to break short off, while the broken upper portion started racing outward toward the earth. Sarka watched it, and noted that the yellowish glow on the earth, even as he watched, was fading out and disappearing. "If the ray will smash the blue column, Yaska, it will also destroy its source. Come, we'll go look for it." Apparently, Sarka also has the hiccups. And holding her hand tightly, he rose to his feet and strode boldly down the inner slope of the vast crater.
No. I made myself a little lightheaded with all that very aggressive breathing. Okay. I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna put my arms above my head and nobody's gonna mention anything and I'm gonna spin around. We're gonna spin around and we're all gonna say, I do believe in fairies. Please get rid of the hiccups. I am dying inside. I have internet speech to record. Please free me from the hiccup-based torment. Oh, I'm getting dizzy. A few more. Oh man, I'm getting dizzy though. Oh, oh. Okay, now that I'm dizzy, oh, that was a mistake. Mistakes have been made. Oh no, mistakes have been made. Oh no. Oh, mistakes have been made. Why did I spin? Oh, why? Oh, yeah, I think just outright stream elements is busted. Let's touch our toes while we're. Nope, that's not helping. Also, fun fact, if you ever want to induce seasickness on land, just slowly spin in an office chair while making your head do this. Just hit 1, 2, 3, 4 points over and over and over again while the office chair slowly spins. It will make you seasick reliably. Learned that one on Mythbusters. No. My diaphragm is a traitor. My diaphragm is a traitor. A traitor to the cause. Yeah, I don't know what's up with stream elements. I gotta like log in after the stream and see what's going on. Anyway, let's dive into chapter 14 and I will just deep breaths for 27 seconds. Sure, we can try deep breaths for 27 seconds. No, I think it actually made it worse. You know, let's look up some hiccup remedies. There's got to be a way to stop hiccups. Like I know there's a lot of folk science about that. Hiccup, not hip up with an F. Hiccup remedies. Sip ice cold water, swallow some granulated sugar, bite on a lemon. Yeah, you're just basically startling your autonomic nervous system that way. I mean, I could stub my toe. It wouldn't be it wouldn't be fun. I'd have to mute the mic. Uh, this one says like do the anxiety breathe into uh, a paper bag thing. Ooh, actually. That says pop your ears. I've never thought about that. You know, do the like it's called the Valsava maneuver. The little thing that they have Velcro in. I know, I'm gonna have to spoon out some organs, but I'm resisting the urge to just collie bomb myself right now. I'm gonna try the hug your knees one. Because it might compress my diaphragm. correctly. We'll see. Can I even do that in this chair? No, I cannot. I'm not that flexible. Oh, man. Yeah, I can't do that in this chair. Hang on a second. I'm going to get up and be off camera for just a moment. I'm going to... Very glad I'm doing this off camera. This is a very embarrassing position to be in, and it's not helping, apparently. Let's do some leg lifts. Yeah, that's right. This is the fitness stream now. Leg lifts. 3, 4, 5. It's not helping. Well, yeah, I do have to kick myself up off the bed. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Wiggling. We're out here wiggling. I'm dying. Dying, Squirtle. Not Bidoof. How could you do this? Alright. I'm just gonna keep reading. I give up. The hiccups have won the battle. But I will win the war. That or I'll have hiccups for the next 6 months. Hey, it's TGP. Hello. You caught us trying to deal with hiccups. Which is especially unfortunate during a reading stream. Anyway, let's dive into chapter 14, the Crater Gnomes, which I misread as the Crater Games, and I was like, oh, the Crater Games, you know, the far future sequel to the Hunger Games. Anyway. Oh. It seemed to Sarka, as he moved down the inner slope of the crater, that the cubes were somehow making sport of him, laughing at him, though no hint of laughter or anything resembling laughter emanated from them. But, shutting his lips grimly, holding fast to Yaska's hand, he proceeded on, reached the lower portion of the inner slope, where it dropped off into a seeming black abyss, and dropped, keeping to a safe speed because of the fact that both he and Yaska retired from movement in the air, though their manner of aerial transportation could scarcely be called flying. The anti-gravitational ovoid simply rendered ineffectual the law of gravity. Down they dropped, endlessly it seemed, while all about them growing gradually, a bluish glow began to make itself manifest. Sarka turned and looked at the face of Yaska and noted that it, all her being even, was glowing with this strange radiance. I know, we've escaped Baleful. We're now probably onto a different word. He smiled at her, and she smiled back, looking down now to what seemed a vast depth. They could see great figures moving, tiny, almost infinitesimal, about a great circular cone, out of the depths of which came that strange bluish column whose outer tip touched the earth. Some inner sense warned Sarka not to touch that column, or to permit Yaska to do so. They dropped down beside it, while Sarka, for no reason that he could assign, once more took his ray director in his free hand and held it in readiness. It seemed so tiny and futile, so foolish for two people, one of them a woman, to go into the very heart of the alien world against an unknown enemy armed with such a tiny weapon. Two people against unguessed myriads whose very nature was an enigma even to Sarka. Closer now appeared the bottom of the crater,
whose floor appeared to be covered with something that looked like blue sand or rock. From this bluish substance, the glow which bathed the two earthlings seemed to emanate. The funnel of the crater had now given way to the immensities of space in all directions, and the cold of outside was being replaced by a warmth which promised to soon even be uncomfortable. Then, without a jar, the two landed at the bottom of the crater, side by side, close enough that almost the great cone came to touch it. Out of the cone came that bluish column to shoot up through the funnel down through which the two of them had dropped, and the motion of, well, whatever it was accompanied by a muted groaning sound like that of a distant waterfall. They paused here in amazement, taking stock of their surroundings. Huge tunnels whose roofs were lost to invisibility in that bluish haze, whose extremities could only even be guessed at, reached off in all directions. As far as the two could tell, they were the only living souls within the crater, though they both knew better. Sarka had the feeling, and he knew Yaska shared it with him, that innumerable eyes were studying them, innumerable intellects were cataloguing them, and somehow he sensed the presence somewhere near of the traitor Dali. Seems like innumerable is now our new baleful. I love my insides. I love that they work so well. Then that discordant sound again, breaking so swiftly that it fell upon the eardrums of Sarka and Yaska like the crack of a doomed whip. Out of the many tunnels, from all directions, came hordes of beings which would have made the nightmares of Paracelsus, first of the scientists of Earth, pale to insignificance. Paracelsus, you see, had written and illustrated his nightmares, had hinted of strange acts of flesh grafting, as the grafting of legs on the head of man. He had spoken and written about ghastly operations from which men came forth as part men, part spiders, part men, part scorpions, dogs, cats, crocodiles. Sarka thought, as his mind went back to those ancient books of his people, which still remained vestiges of the theories of Paracelsus, that somehow, in his dreams, Paracelsus must have visited the craters of the moon. These people, if they could be called people, they had heads like the heads of earthlings, broad-domed of brow, lacking eyelashes or lids, so that their eyes were perpetually staring. They possessed no bodies at all, and their legs, thin and attenuated to the size of wrists of the average men, seemed to support their massive heads with some difficulty. From all directions they came, looking like spiders, as Sarka the First had described From all directions they came, looking like spiders, such as Sarka the First had described Sarka when Sarka had been a mere boy. They came on the floor, out of the tunnels. They dropped from the walls of the tunnels and down from the invisible roofs, landing on the floor as lightly as feathers, and they all converged on Yaska and Sarka. They seemed to have no fear at all. But only a vast curiosity. Closer and closer they came. Yaska's grip tightened on the hand of Sarka, for one of the creatures, with a spiderish leap, had jumped upon her, fastening its legs in her tight-fitting costume, where he hung, his face within an inch or two of hers. His lidless eyes, unblinking, stared deeply into hers. Others jumped up beside the first, and still others clambered over Sarka, until both Sarka and Yaska were covered by them, like beetles attacked by ants. But these strange gnome-like creatures, who didn't fear these strangers, apparently meant them no harm. Then, after a thorough scrutiny, began the strangest talking Sarka had ever heard. The crater gnomes seemed to communicate by making strange clicking sounds with their tongues, sounds which were unmusical and discordant, and which, as the gnomes who stood back from them, because already the two were covered until no more could cling to Jaska or Sarka, joined in the speech, mounting in the cavern to a vast crescendo of sound. Sarka knew then that this was the sound which had come out to them while they were crouched at the crater rim. These were the people of the moon. But if these were moon men, what or who were those gleaming cubes? Stand perfectly still, Sarka mentally admonished Yaska. They apparently mean us no harm. He had not spoken aloud, had not allowed his thought to reach any but Yaska, but instantly the discordant clicking ceased, and the gnomes were quiet, as though they politely listened to someone who had interrupted them, yet whose interruption they resented, or perhaps were curious about. Wondering how the creature would regard his action, Sarka... I thought there was a hiccup coming. Wondering how the creature would regard his action, Sarka reached forth and plucked away the first gnome which had jumped upon Yaska, and placed him gently on the ground. The thing merely stared at Sarka with his lidless eyes, as though wondering at Sarka's meaning. Then his lips, which were triangular rather than straight as those of earthlings, began again that strange clucking. Immediately the gnomes which clung to Yaska and Sarka dropped away, and scuttled into the midst of the myriads that stood and watched. They did not understand the speech of these earthlings, but they were unusually clever in comprehending the meaning of gestures. Hold fast to me, Yaska, thought Sarka toward her, and wondered anew as the gnomes instantly ceased their clucking sounds. I'm going to try an experiment. Holding her hand still, he turned and strode straight towards the huge cone out of which rose the bluish column. Instantly the gnomes broke into a frightful clucking of tongues, a sound that mounted to eardrum-breaking intensity, and in a trice, climbing over one another to get into position, they moved in between Sarka and the cone. So eager were they to bar this further progress, they stood atop one another, until the depth of them was as tall as Sarka standing upright. Yet, though they plainly said to Sarka, "You must not approach the cone," they did not seem to be angry with their visitors, but only curious. Sarka looked at Yaska, noted how wanly she smiled. Then he turned and headed for the nearest of the monster tunnels. Instantly, he detected a surprising eagerness in the renewed clicking. Shutting down. Oh, I was hoping that would help. It didn't help. If anyone has any fun hiccup cures, give it a shot. Instantly, he detected a surprising eagerness in the renewed clicking of tongues, while the gnomes raced ahead, behind, all about the two, capering like pet animals, showing these strangers the way into the tunnel. As they entered it, Sarka tried to discover whence came the bluish glow. The floor seemed to be of bluish sandstone, though its color, too, might have been caused by the glow. It was warm, too, so warm that perspiration was breaking out on the cheeks of Sarka. Whence came the glow? Apparently from the very walls of the tunnel or its roof, but surely from somewhere, surely from some secret place whence it was diffused all over. And Yaska, said Sarka, the moon, according to my father's research, is literally honeycombed with craters like this one. Again, as he thought, that strange sudden cessation of the clucking of the gnomes. Whither were they leading? Whither were they leading them? It was plain to be seen that the gnomes were heading for some destination, almost herding Sarka and Yaska toward it. Capering creatures who behaved witlessly, yet were far from witless. If Sarka were not too sadly mistaken, these were moon men and women, too, perhaps, since he could not tell the sex of them, and those gleaming cubes were their outer guards, perhaps slaves even. If the cubes were really of metal, they had felt warm to Sarka's touch after all. Then these moon men had gone further in science than earthlings, as they'd imbued at least some metals, or stones perhaps, with intelligence sufficiently advanced for them to perform actions independently of their master's wills. Sarka, too, was remembering another thing, that he had touched one of those gnomes to remove it from Yaska, and had felt a distinct shock that was patently electrical. The bluish glow was increasing, becoming more soft and mellow, shading gradually into golden as they advanced, shading still as they preceded it until it was almost white, almost blinding in its radiance. Then, of a sudden, the clucking of the gnomes ended, and the creatures ceased their capering, fell into something that might have been an ordered military formation, and with Yaska and Sarka in the midst of them, moved straight toward a broad expanse of the tunnel wall, in the face of which appeared 3 long lines deeply cut within the shape of a triangle. The gnome who had first leapt upon Yaska advanced to the wall, paused with his face almost against the lower line of the triangle, and remained there, intently staring, while the other gnomes remained mute and unmoving. Stronger and stronger appeared the blinding light. Slowly the inner portion of the triangle began to give inward, like a door, and out of that opening came that blinding radiance. As the triangular door stood entirely open, Sarka and Yaska stood in thunderstruck silence, staring like people bereft of their senses. For there, standing in the opening, the now white radiance itself a mantle to cover her, was a woman, unclothed save for said radiance, who might have been of the earth, save that she was more beautiful than any woman of the earth. Beside her, the radiant beauty of Yaska paled, became wan and sickly. But Sarka noted immediately her eyes, whose depths bewildered, amazed him. For in them he could see no expression, no feeling, but only abysmal cruelty. That she was Sarka's master, that she was Sarka's master, and Yaska's master, and master of all these gnomes, became instantly apparent, for telepathically she addressed Sarka. I am busy now. The moon people will hold you prisoners in the place of blue light until I am ready to give you to the cone. On that note, folks, we are going to take a little breather, a little break. For those of you listening to the podcast feed, I will see you next week as we resolve what's up with this strange, naked, glowing person, and what nature of control she has over these moon gnomes. For those of you listening live, however, we're just going to take a little 15-minute break. The bot is currently broken that tells you what I normally do in the BRBs, but we're going to flip over to the text on screen, and we are going to be right back. We'll be out for at most 15 minutes. I'll set a timer for 15 minutes. Now is a fantastic time to, if you've been sitting with me, stand up, walk around, stretch your legs. If you have been standing up and walking around and stretching your legs for this whole 2 hours, I suggest that you sit down, take a break. Now is a great time, regardless of your status of movement, to brew yourself a little cup of tea. Have yourself some water. Indeed, hydrate, as Raz has redeemed. Pet your pets for me. If you are in need of medications, take them. Oh yeah, it has been a little bit since I've logged into Stream Elements. I was fussing with it in the interim since October, but I will give it another look while I'm in the midst of the BRB. Anyway, if you need to take medications, this is your open-ended reminder. Eat something, maybe make a snack. We will be back in at most 15 minutes. In the meanwhile, I have a fun little I have a fun little piece of music that I think you guys will like. If I can find my audio assets folder, I think is very on brand for what's been happening. Raz says the ever so slight lag between hearing you in the other room and then Twitch is low key kind of funny. I'm glad I can't hear myself through the door because that would speech jam me. Ooh. Okay. Aquapep. I don't remember what that is. That's not what I'm looking for. Where is I'm dying. I'm dying, Squirtle. Drum roll, electronic effects, Final Fantasy fanfare. I have something here. I know. No, that's not what I want. I'm trying to. Oh. To be fair, I'm in the hall by my room, not outside yours. Fair. Where the heck is this? I know I have it. It's called like, here we are. This is probably what I'm thinking of. I had a tab open one time with bad lag, so I thought someone was harassing me, but it was just myself until today. That's really funny. Is this what I'm thinking of? It is. Can I add things to the queue here? Why that's so weird? I mean, that is what I'm looking for. Don't start yet. Let me just put some, Ooh. Oh, I can't add music to a queue in here either. That's fun. That's very helpful. Okay, we don't get to listen to the fun music I was just thinking about. Instead, well, I struggled to keep down my lunch, apparently. Dang. Instead, we will listen to... no, not that one. Sorry, I'm all discombobulated by this, hiccups. We will listen to more hurdy-gurdy. Erasmutastic sneak up on me at some point and boo like mad. Not right now, of course. Alright, I'll be right back. I'll be back in at most 15 minutes. Enjoy the hurdy-gurdy. I'm gonna try very hard to not have these hiccups. Okay, welcome back. We have enjoyed a very hearty little, we've enjoyed a very little hearty,
Hardy hurdy-gurdy.
yeah, a hearty helping of hurdy-gurdy, if you will.
Hello.
Raz is here, by the way.
Just for a moment, I was paying attention to the cat,
It's true. They need their attentions.
to the boys.
The balls.
Because library actually lets me pick him up
It's true.
from time to time.
Anyway, I had myself a very productive little moment in the break. I had myself some soup. Hopefully that cures my hiccups.
I made him hydrate.
It's true. The hydrate redeem has been acknowledged. I also might have fixed stream elements. Who knows?
Goodbye, stream.
Good luck. 8-ball? Yeah, I have no idea. I logged into stream elements. I don't know what's going on. What's my deal here? Ah, chatbot. You. Oh, 8-ball's not on. That's why. Durr. Yeah, I know. It has been 15 minutes. You know what? Quote will work. I'm not blue. It's true. I'm not blue. Anyway. Attend, O reader, our tale of wonder. Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everyone. Last week we left off meeting some sort of moon monarch ? And we battled our way through a very thoroughly inconvenient set of hiccups. Which was, you know, a grand old time. This reminds me, I have a thing. One moment. Oh, yeah, that's super behind. That's super far behind, isn't it? Wait, where are all my alerts? Where did they all go? There's definitely more than this. Raiders. Ah, here we are. Run this one again. Oop, that's not what I meant to click. Yeah, what the heck? There's definitely more... Whatever. Let's make sure this works before we dive too far into things. Sure is cold out there. Happy to welcome you in, Spunky Heart. Stream Elements seems to be working. Stream Elements was very miffed about the fact that it was getting ignored while I was big busy. The spook did not work, indeed. As Raz in chat points out, I was holding a bowl, this bowl right here, this little blue bowl, and I startled, and I was like, oh, no startle, need to hold bowl. But hopefully downing water and eating good soup helped. Let's see. I think we can dive into chapter 15, can't we? These folks have basically jostled Earth loose from its orbit and are using it as a giant spaceship, and they're trying to invade the moon because there are too many people on the Earth because of overpopulation, and they want to colonize the moon to have more space. And right now there's these weird goblins. I think they're called they're gremlins. They've got a bunch of little spindly leggies and hands, and they've got never blinking eyes, and they've got little triangle mouths, and they're very unpleasant. And they all led the two main players here to the Moon Monarch last week, and now we're gonna dive in and find out what the deal is with this weird glowing lady as we dive into chapter 15. The place of blue light. So the gnomes were moon people, masters of the moon cubes, and people in cubes were ruled by a woman who resembled a woman of Earth. The gnomes took them back the way they come. Where, Sarka wondered, were the people of the gens of Dali? And where was Dali himself? Sarka was sure that in those first discords that had come out of the crater, he had heard at least a hint of the laughter of Dali. Dali, for context, is Sarkis, our current guy, his rival, and Sarkis tricked Dali into being the head of the landing party that is colonizing the moon, and dude disappeared, and we have no idea where he is. And so Sarka had to roll up and be like, "Hi, I am now the main character." This woman clothed in radiance, who was she? And what was she? That she was a creature of the moon, and yet resembled in all ways a woman of Earth, save that she was more beautiful than any woman Sarka had ever seen. It seemed almost impossible to believe. And yet he had seen her, so had Yaska, and as Sarka and Yaska, with the capering gnomes still about them, were led away to a fate at which they could only guess, Sarka wondered at Yaska's silence and the strange lack of expression upon her face. He pressed her hand, but somehow she failed to return the pressure, mystifying more than ever. The sudden coldness, well, it wasn't like Yaska. Back they went through the vast cavern, where the cone of the bluish column still moaned and murmured. Sarka moved as close to the cone as the gnomes would permit, and peered up along the mighty length of the column. At its tip was still the earth, like a star viewed from the bottom of a very deep well. Smaller, too, it had seemed, which proved that Sarka's breaking of the blue column had been but momentary, that the column almost instantly regained its contact with the earth. What was its source? What was the composition of this strange column? At the moment there could be no answer to the question. Now the gnomes were escorting them into another tunnel, whose glow was even bluer than that which the two had experienced in the other tunnels. And the deeper they penetrated, the more distant from the cavern of the cone, the deeper in color became that light. Finally, the gnome who had mentally asked permission of the radiant woman to show her Yaska and Sarka passed before another expanse of wall identical in appearance with that of the wall of the triangle from which the radiant woman had appeared. This time the gnome managed ingress by a strange clucking sound, with his triangular lips held close to the baseline of the triangle. Now the door swung open, but the radiance which now came out was not clear white, as in the case of the outer door, but deeply, coldly blue. For the first time, the gnomes used force with their prisoners, thus proving to them they were indeed prisoners. Their tiny feet caught at Sarka and at Yaska, and forced them through the door, which swung shut behind them. Sarka looked at Yaska, who, in this strange new light, had taken on the color of indigo, and smiled at her. She did not return his smile, but her eyes looked deeply, somewhat sorrowfully, into his, as though she asked him a question he couldn't understand, to which he therefore could give no answer. Before we continue, I have realized something is incorrect. Font. Oh, I can't change the font? Preferences. Fonts. Do I have open dyslexic here? I would really love to. LMNO. No, I do not have open dyslexic. That's a thing I need to do later. Someone note that in the Discord if I don't. Actually, I'm going to write that down right now, because that's going to bother me. I need to get Open Dyslexic as a font and use it for this, because it's objectively the best font to read in. And I will sit on that hill. I will defend said hill. Stop forgetting to do stuff. Oh, I know. That's why I've got a Discord that's literally just to-do list. This one goes in the layout improvements. Get Open Dyslexic to use for paper cuts. Written down it has been, and so too it will become completed. Eventually. Hopefully sooner rather than later. It's a lot easier for me to get motivated about making accessibility changes than, practically speaking, any other type of change. Anyway, Indigo, that's where we were. Sarka was now conscious of the fact that the heat of their prison house, whose character they did not as yet know, was becoming almost unbearable. They were alone, too, for the gnomes had not entered the door of the triangle. Sarka partially removed his life mask, and testing the atmosphere of the place, found it capable of being breathed without the mask. He signaled mentally to Yaska to remove her mask, and when the girl had done so, he took her in his arms and kissed her on the lips. Ooh. She accepted his caress, but did not return it, and her eyes still peered deeply into his. Well, beloved, I'm terribly sorry, but I did not want you to come because I was afraid that something of this sort would happen. She did not answer this. What is it, Yaska? What did you think of that woman? Beautiful. Fearfully beautiful. But did you see her eyes? She had no more mercy in her heart than if she were made of stone, and she hated us both the moment she saw us. And you, Sarka? Did you hate her too? Sarka stared at her, not comprehending. I feel that if we are ever to escape her, we must kill her or render her incapable of retaining us. Then, of her own accord, Yaska placed her arms around Sarka and gave him her lips. Her new behavior was as incomprehensible to Sarka as her former enigmatic expression had been. Wise in the ways of science was Sarka, but he certainly knew nothing of women. If we've not already disclaimed this book, by the way, this isn't particularly egregious in comparison to the things we've seen that normally makes me go, hey, disclaimer, but like, friendly reminder, this book was written in 1930. Keep that in mind. Please use your brain. Is the disclaimer in a nutshell. I have a much longer-winded version of the disclaimer down in the description. I'm probably going to start putting it in the show notes for the podcast. But long story short, these are public domain books. Certain aspects you may read as a modern reader and go, ooh, cringe. You know, such is fate. But yeah, this is from 1930. This is the August 1930 issue of Astounding Stories of Super Science, now better known as Analog. That's right. This weird little science fiction serial magazine has continued to exist from 1930 until right now. Yes, right now. Real thing. I'm probably going to get a subscription to the physical magazine now that I'm not in the RV. I'm going to be honest. That'd be a good Christmas present. That's a thought. Anyway. Now, hand in hand again, they began a survey of their prison house. The bluish glow was unbearable to the eyes, and tears came unbidden and ran down the cheeks of the prisoners. In a minute or two, perspiration was literally bathing the bodies of the two. After a questioning exchange of glances, Sarka swiftly divested himself of his costume, stripping down to the grey toga of Earth's manhood. With a shrug, Yaska removed her clothing to her own toga, and the two suits Sarka carried under his arm. They started ahead, exploring, then sprang back with a cry of fright. Sarka did not know whether it was Yaska or himself who had cried out, for just as they had moved forward, a rent opened in the floor at their feet, and their eyes for a moment, that they could stand no longer, peered into a bluely flaming abyss, which, save for the color, reminded Sarka of the word pictures of hell that he'd read in Earth's books of antiquity. As the two stepped back, the rent in the floor closed instantly. Sarka had noted where the end of it had been, and started to detour his eyes on the floor. Over to his left, the bluely glowing wall reached up to the invisible immensity. But as he would have passed along the wall, the rent opened again, effectively barring his way. Beyond the rent he could see a vast continuation of the cavern, and he felt that only they could pass the rent. Then they might reach a place where the heat was not so unbearable they could stay and talk in comfort. Releasing Yaska, he stepped back and prepared to leap the spot where the rent had been. High he jumped, and far, surprised at the length of his own leap. He landed lightly, far beyond the area where the rent had been, and even as he landed, a rent opened again at his feet, thus effectually barring further progress. It could just as easily, he told himself, have opened under my feet and dropped me into the abyss. From behind him came the sudden sound of screaming. He whirled to look back to see Yaska standing there, arms outstretched toward him, her eyes full of fear and horror. And as he stood watching, she raced to him, unmindful of abysses that might open under her feet, and flung herself into his arms. "Come back! Come back! Don't you see? They don't wish you to explore further. We're in their power. We simply must await their pleasures, whoever or whatever they are. They see all we do." And so they did turn back, and stood against the door which held them prisoner, and the heat of the place seemed to enter into them, to gnaw at their very vitals. After a time, Sarka found himself almost tearing at his throat, fighting for breath. Gasping, the tears bathing their cheeks until even their tears and their perspiration would flow no more. They huddled now just inside the massive stone door, arms about each other, and almost prayed for death. Sarka at least prayed for death for both of them, but Yaska prayed for a way of deliverance, prayed that herself and Sarka might somehow win free and be together again. Sarka, who knew little of women, marveled at the grandeur of her courage, and wondered that he really knew this radiant woman so little. He compared her in his mind with the unclothed woman who had ordered him here as prisoners, and it came to him that Yaska was all perfection, all tender womanhood, while the radiant woman was a monster without soul or compassion, a creature of horror who mocked God with her outward seeming of perfection. Yaska read his thoughts and smiled wanly to herself, and Sarka wondered how, suffering as he knew she must be suffering, she could find the courage to smile. Then, for a time, the two became comatose, mastered by the blue heat, and in dreamlike imaginings wandered in strange fields which could only to these two have ever been racial memories, since neither had ever seen such fields. There were cool streams, all a murmur, and breezes which cooled their sun-tanned cheeks. Water touched their tongues and cooled their whole bodies as they gratefully imbibed it. New chicken McNuggets with all tender womanhood. that's a good one, Kariki. Absolutely Promeo. In their wanderings, which Sarka was a faun and Yaska a nymph, they talked together in a language which only these two comprehended. A language which dealt in figures of speech, a language which depended upon the hand clasps for periods, glances of the eye for commas, and the singing of their hearts for complete understanding. Then a cool breeze, cool by comparison anyway, caressed their pain-distorted cheeks, and the gnomes came in, found them lying there, and clucked endlessly, as though wondering what to do with them. From hand to tiny hand, their feet even serving as hands, the gnomes passed garments of the Yens of Dali, and clothed again the two whom the place of blue light had all but slain. Of that ghastly experiment Sarka retained but one real memory. That bluish light in the midst of the abyss, shifting and swaying like blue serpents swimming in Hades. That bluish light of the cone, which he'd broken up for a brief moment by the use of his ray director. Was this bluish light in the abyss the source of the light in the cone? If one were to, perhaps, destroy it at its source, well. The two regained consciousness completely as the triangular door closed behind Sarka and Yaska and the gnomes, and they were taken to the refreshing coolness of the tunnel, led back again in the direction of the room where they'd seen the radiant woman. Both Yaska and Sarka noticed that they were clothed in new clothing, and a shy blush tinged the cheek of Yaska as her eyes met those of Sarka. This time they entered the vast chamber of radiance behind the first triangular door, and were forced on their knees to do obeisance to the radiant woman, who sat on a gleaming yellow stone as a dais. The guards who forced Sarka and Yaska to their knees were clothed in the green of the Yens of Dali, and Dali himself, his face stern, but bearing no sign of recognition of these two, stood at the right hand of the radiant woman. You come to us as spies, the thought of the radiant woman impinged upon the brains of Sarka and Yaska. And as spies you should be given to the cone. But if you swear eternal allegiance to me, to obey me in all things, to forego your allegiance to earth, your lives will be spared. What say you? Boldly Sarka stared into the almost opaque eyes of the woman. Then his glance went to the face of Dali. What, he asked boldly in the language of earth, does the traitor Dali say? I have sworn allegiance to Luar, who addresses you, and am her ally in all things. I have but one addition to make to what she says. Yaska belongs to me. The sudden leering grin of Dali was hideous. Sarka peered at Yaska, framing his answer, but Yaska spoke first. For myself, O Dali, I can answer in but one way. Return me to the place of blue light. Forget me there. Sarka smiled, while his heart leapt with joy. And I, O Luar, he said mentally to the radiant woman, prefer death with Yaska, the place of the blue light, than life as a traitor to the world of my nativity. Instantly, Luar began the clicking sound, which was the language of the gnomes, at the same time allowing her thoughts, as she spoke, to impress themselves upon the brains of the prisoner. Take them away. Take them to the cavern of the cone, where they have suffered as much as inferior beings are capable of suffering. Thrust them into the base of the cone. Chapter 16. Cavern of the Cone. The gnomes had been bidden to take the prisoners to the cavern of the cone, but to the surprise of Sarka and Yaska, they were taken back to the place of the blue light. This time the gnomes entered the place with them, closing and securing the door behind them. Dairy Queen presents the new Dairy Queen Cavern of the Cone. We're very hungry tonight, aren't we? But the place of the blue light had changed. Now it had no floor of blue as it had before, but only a corridor, perhaps wide enough to allow the passage of 4 grown men walking side by side. While the abyss of which the two had got but the merest hint through the opening and closing rents filled all the center of the place. The gnomes seemed impervious to this unendurable heat, and these, moving together, one behind the other, one beside the other, one atop the other, formed a living wall between Sarka and Yaska and the rim of the flaming blue abyss to protect them from the heat. Yet through the body of this living wall of gnomes, a wall which was higher than the heads of Sarka and Yaska, the heat forced its way to the prisoners and burned them anew with its agony. To what dread rendezvous were they going? Where, save for the few guards of the House of Loire, were the people of the Gens of Dali? Sarka felt somehow that the answers to all these questions would soon be made manifest, and a feeling of exaltation he could not explain was possessing him as he advanced. Around the corridor, whose one side was the walls reaching up to invisibility, whose other side dropped off into the abyss, the gnomes herded the prisoners. The leader of the gnomes was again the gnome who had first leapt upon Yaska to examine her curiously. Now, watching the lidless eyes of this being, Sarka fancied he could detect a hint of some expression. The gnome was excited at some prospect, some climax that they were approaching. What, though? On and on they moved, the blue flames from the abyss roaring in a way that neither of the prisoners had ever experienced, reaching upward and searing tongues toward the invisible roof of this place. Then, when they'd progressed far from the door of entry, Sarka gasped at a new manifestation. Out of the abyss, some distance ahead, came a gleaming thing, something that had apparently evolved itself out of the flames of the abyss. Blue of color it was because of the flames from the pit, but Sarka recognized it with a start that he could not suppress nor understand. It was one of those cubes, such as he and Yaska had seen at the lip of the moon crater. As they approached, guided by the gnomes, other cubes appeared out of the abyss, others in numbers swiftly augmented, until a veritable battalion of them had marshaled itself there at the lip of the abyss. Straight toward these cubes the gnomes led Sarka and Yaska, and when they had reached the center of the group, they halted, forming a circle, still a wall to mask the prisoners from the heat of the abyss. The leader of the gnomes stopped with his face, his lidless eyes close to one of the cubes. For a moment he paused thus, and Sarka felt sure that somehow the gnome was holding thought converse with the cube, but try as he might, he could find no meaning in the weird conversation for himself. It was oddly like listening to a conversation in a code beyond his knowledge. Then the gnome turned back to Sarka and Jaska. By a pressure of tiny feet, he tried to indicate that Sarka and Yaska should unclasp their hands, but they only clung the tighter and now threw their arms about each other. The gnome desisted, much to the joy of the lovers, while Sarka studied the cubes, wondering what their mission was with Yaska and himself. Slowly, together, the cubes began to lose their bluish glow, their cube shape entirely, to vanish utterly. In a trice, still locked in each other's arms, Sarka and Yaska saw the gnomes through what appeared to be an even bluer haze. Besides, the heat of the abyss no longer tortured them, and their bodies were cooling in a way that was unbelievably refreshing. "What is it, beloved? What is it?" whispered Yaska. Sarka stared at the gnomes, now in retreat, capering as they had first capered when the two had fallen into their hands, toward the door by which all had entered. Mystified, Sarka put forth his hand. It came in contact with something solid and oddly warm, which it stirred an instantly responsive chord in the brain of Sarka. This feeling was the same as he'd experienced when he lifted those cubes and hurled them into the crater, where they dissolved in falling and instantly reappeared, each under its own air car. Yaska, the cubes have dissolved themselves, have reformed in the shape of a globe as a protective covering about us, to protect us from the heat of the abyss. Apparently we are not to be killed at once. The cubes are the slaves of the gnomes, of whom Loire is a ruler. They were indeed locked inside a globe whose integral parts were the cubes of their acquaintance, and the atmosphere of the interior was not uncomfortable, but otherwise... not uncomfortable, but otherwise. Sarka and Yaska were feeling normal for the first time since they'd landed on the moon. But what was the meaning of this strange imprisonment? They were soon to know. For the globe which enclosed them moved to the edge of the flaming abyss and dropped into the bluish glow. It did not drop heavily like a falling object on earth, but rather floated downward right into the heart of the flames. At this new manifestation of the strangeness of science on the moon, Sarka was all at once a scientist himself, striving to find adequate answers for things which, from cause to effect, were entirely new to him. With Yaska still clasped close against him, he seated himself on the base of the globe and studied the area through which they were passing. Blue flames seemed to be born somewhere, as infinite distance below them, blue flames which he knew to be the element which, that shot outward from the great cone, had forced the moon away from the earth. No sound of the roaring flames came through the globe, but every movement of them was visible. Sarka turned and peered through the bottom of the globe, but all he could see below were the flames, a molten indigo lake of them. Now, as they floated downward, the glow was giving way to lighter blue, to white, almost pure white, like the radiance which covered Loire like a mantle. Sarka felt himself on the eve of vast, important discoveries, and the scientist in him made him, for the moment, almost forget the woman at his side. Yaska, unbothered about anything now that Sarka was at her side, regarded his expression of deep concentration with a tolerant smile. Whiter now was the light, and faster fell the globe which held the two. The color of the globe, now fallen below the area of blue, had taken on, chameleon-like, the color of white flames that bathed it. Then, apparently right in the center of the lake of white flames, though Sarka could see no solid place on which the globe had landed, the globe indeed came to rest. Now everything was plain to see, and Sarka studied his surroundings with new interest. He felt a mounting sensation of scalp-prickling horror. For scattered throughout the lake of white flames, in all directions, as far as the eye could reach, standing alone, suffering untold agonies, from the expressions on their faces, were the people of the gens of Dali. Head and shoulders now with scalp-prickling, horror-foaming action. I would be horror-foaming at seeing all of these people suffering untold agonies. No longer were they clothed in green and wearing on breast and back the yellow stars of their gens. Now they were as nude as they'd come into the world, and standing there, each was holding out hands in horror to hold back myriads of the gnomes who would have forced them to submerge themselves in the white flames of the lake. Was this the Yens of Dali being burned alive? What was the meaning of this? For a moment, filled with horror, Sarka looked away from the spectacle. Off to his right, as he sat, he noted the flames, which here seemed lighter than they had in high levels, were converging on a single spot toward the side of the lake of flames, as smoke converges on the base of a chimney leading outward to the air. He knew as he stared that he was gazing at the spot where the bluish column of the cone was born. Shaking his head, he turned back to the mighty spectacle of this horrible thing that was being done to the people of the gens of Dali. In his brain there suddenly crashed a thought whose source he could only guess at, whose meaning mystified him more than anything he had experienced. The thought might have emanated from Loire or from Dali, but the more he thought of the matter, the more he thought of how the phrasing of the thought was like the telepathy of Sarka II, now thousands of miles away upon the earth, and this was the thought. If they light the flames will destroy them. If they go into them freely, voluntarily, they'll be rendered immune to heat and cold, to life and to death. But it is better that they die for Earth's sake. What did it all mean? Sarka thought of the radiant white light which perpetually bathed the person of Loire, and thought that he had somehow been given a hint of its source. If the gens of Dali were voluntarily bathed in the lake of white flames, would they become as Loire? Somehow, though he knew that such bathing would save their lives, the idea filled him anew with terror. He found himself torn between two duties. If he sent his people out there to the Yens of Dali, people of Earth, or if he sent his thought out there to the Yens of Dali, people of Earth, his people even, they'd be saved, but might forever become allies of the people of the moon. If Sarka didn't tell them, they would die, and there were millions of them. But his science had always been a science of life, and it still was. "Into the flames," he bade his people. "Into the flames." But they did not heed him, and for the first time, the atmosphere of the interior of the globe seemed filled with savage, abysmal menace. Plain to Sarka was the meaning of that menace. The cubes which comprised this globe were loyal to their masters, and the masters loyal to a mistress Loire, and would countenance no meddling. Likewise, it was impossible, if the gnomes willed to the cubes, for Sarka to transmit his thoughts to the Yens of Dali through the transparent walls of the globe, for they were prisoners indeed of Dali and Loire. But could Sarka and Yaska turn their newfound knowledge to their own use? Sarka was thinking back to one of the ancient tomes of his people. It spoke, someplace, of a man who got trapped in the heat of a seething volcano, where the heart of it had cured him of his illnesses, made him whole again, made him new with youth and freshness. But since the cubes could forestall his transmission of thought, and perhaps could read and understand thoughts, how was he to tell Yaska? How to show her that a way of deliverance had been given into their hands, if only they possessed the courage to use it? Again came that thought which Sarka recognized as the telepathy of his father. "Courage! You will win, and Yaska with you." Thoughts could come in with them then, but could not go out. Or it did mean that the cubes, or the masters of the cubes, did not care if the prisoners received messages from outside, because they knew themselves capable of frustrating anything the prisoners were planning. Perhaps. More than likely all that was it.
Boys, behave.
But looking through the bottom of the globe into the sea of white flames below, Sarka gripped more tightly his ray director and tried to marshal the forces of his courage. There was surely some way of escape, surely some way out of this strange predicament. Out of curiosity, how many chapters does this have? Oh, we've got 2 more chapters in this book. All right. Or this section of the book, I mean. Guys. Guys, hey. Whoa, don't engage the kickies. Guys, can we wait like 15 minutes? Well, I'd be upset too. You guys were biting each other. Just lay back down. Can we turn on the warm blanket? That'll help you settle down. It usually helps them settle down anyway. Yeah, give me a minute. Nobody explode. This will take mere moments. There we go. Now we got a heated blanket. We got a heated bed for babies to be comfy upon. How does that sound? Probably for the best anyway. My back will need it after sitting in this chair. I already sit in this chair for 8 hours a day. As much as I love to stream to you all, any more time in this chair is kind of rough. Yeah, for context, Magnus immediately just like loafed down. He's like, oh, alright. He just immediately settled in. He's like, alright, it's comfy. He loves that heated blanket. Which many thanks to Raz. I stole her heated blanket. Mine stopped working. Couldn't tell you why, but it stopped working. Which was very rude of it. Okay. Chapter 5, 6, 7, 17. Casting the die. Somehow, Sarka believed that this white radiance of the abyss held the secret of the omnipotence of Luar, if omnipotence she did indeed possess. Of that she certainly seemed sure, else Dali would not have been with her. Besides, she had asked Sarka and Yaska to swear allegiance to her. Yes, the secret was here, in the heart of the lake of white flames. It might have been the moon fountain of youth or of omnipotence. There was no telling, unless Sarka tried an experiment. His fury at Dali knew almost no bounds, and he was conscious of a desire too poignant to be born in some way to circumvent the arch-traitor. For here in the craters of the moon, Dali was working out a strange amplification of the scheme which he had, centuries before, proposed to Sarka the First. He was subjecting the people of his Yens to the white flames. If they immersed themselves voluntarily, they became as Luar was. I keep almost misreading that as lunar. As Luar was, but still subservient to the will of Dali, and, in his hands, invincible instruments of war. Dali had doubtless already been bathed in the flames. Sarka was not sure, for in the home of Luar the white light was so blinding it could have been impossible to make sure that the white radiance clothed the others with Luar. That's it. That's it. Dali and those guards at the ends of the dais of Luar have already been subjected to the white flames. The rest who immerse themselves voluntarily come forth as Luar and Dali,
who do not die, Dali's manner of forcing the survival of the fittest, his idea of the flood in his grandfather's time, only now he causes his selection by flames instead of flood. He believes that only those worthy to survive, to stand at his back in whatever he conceives to be his need, will guess the secret of the immersion. The others will die. What a terrible alternative, when Dali could have easily given the secret to all his people, could have told them how to save themselves, but this was not Dali's way. Here, in the beginning of what was to become a dual sovereignty of the moon, Dali had already taken thought on the matter of overpopulation, was destroying the many such that the few, the strongest, the most ruthless might survive. Hundreds of thousands, millions of the Yens of Dali stood at the door of life and did not know how to enter merely because Dali withheld the key. And, pausing in terror before the flames, they died when a step and plunge would have saved them all. If he lives to be 1,000,000, if he lives through everlasting life, and does penance through 1,000 reincarnations, Dali can never atone for this wholesale destruction of humanity, but I wonder. Sarka realized the nicety of revenge of Dali upon Yaska and himself. Dali had not given the secret to the prisoners, but by his use of the cubes he had plunged them into the very heart of the horror, where they could see the suffering of the people of the Yens. Then, when they had seen and appreciated the horror of it all, they would follow the people of the Yens to death. But Luar had spoken of thrusting them into the base of the cone. Then they were not for the flames after all. How could it be done? The globe composed of the cubes had but to transport the prisoners to the base of the cone, press against that base, and open to let the prisoners free, and in the heart of the white-blue column they'd be hurled outward from the moon into space. The mere prospect of such horror caused the perspiration to break forth anew on the body of Sarka. But there might be a way. I wonder if the Earth people in this crater could read my thoughts in spite of their agonies, if I could get my thought to them through the globe. I wonder if reading my thoughts they would obey. Bit by bit, as parts of a puzzle fall into place, he made his plan, and his heart beat high with excitement. Yaska bent before him to look into his eyes, and he knew that she was trying to read his face. She knew. Wise Yaska, that this brilliant lover of hers was making a plan. She believed in the sure success of it, because it would be his plan. She smiled at him, her courage high, and waited. Holding the ray director between his body and that of Yaska, he took a terrible, ghastly chance. Dali had known the secret sign manual of these two, but would the intelligence of the cubes comprehend it? He must take the chance, slender as it seemed. His free hand began to spell out, with all speed, the mad plan he had conceived. The white flames are harmless if one plunges into them voluntarily. Are you afraid to attempt it? No? Then unfasten your clothing. Have it so arranged that you can drop entirely out of it when I give you the signal, which will be a mere widening of the eyes like this. You understand? We must go nude into the flames so they obey our whole bodies. But when you slip out of your clothing, tear your anti-gravitational ovoid from the skull pan of your helmet. Hold it in your mouth. Then depend upon me and have no fear. I have no fear, replied the fingers of Yaska. I go to death with you if you wish, or to life. Feeling the menace of the cubes almost gripping at his throat as he got into action, Sarka unfastened his own clothing, ripped the ovoid from his helmet, placed it in his mouth, and then looking at Yaska, he gave her the signal. Instantly, at her nod, he brought forth the ray director, pressed it with his fingers, directing its muzzle toward the curve of the globe, swinging it around in a circle, cutting out the bottom of the globe of cubes. The action must have been one of untold surprise to the cubes which made up the globe, for before anything could be done to stay the hand of Sarka, his ray director had cut out the bottom of the globe, and Yaska and himself, divested now of all clothing, had fallen from the globe. Unbearable heat slashed and tore at them. They still held hands, and when their feet touched upon something solid, they were gasping with the unbelievable heat, but it was ripping at their lungs like talons of white-hot steel. But, pausing not at all, Sarka raced ahead with Yaska and dived straight into the lake of white flames. As he dived, he directed his thoughts toward the people of the Yens who stood,
undecided, dying by slow inches on their little oases in the lake. And this was the thought which was a command. Plunge into the flames, they will not hurt you. Plunge in and obey my commands, O people of the gens of Dali. I, Sarka, command that you obey me. Yaska, who commanded you at the will of Dali, she also commands. Gather with Yaska and me at the base of the cone. You have but to follow the converging of the flames. Together the two plunged in, and it seemed all at once as though the fire had gone out of the white flames, for they were cool and soothing to the touch. Sarka could feel new life being born in him, could feel himself revitalized, exalted, lifted to unimaginable heights. He suddenly experienced the desire to run and shout his joy for all to hear. But reason held him still. Not thus easily would Luar and Dali, the traitor, give over their designs against these two. But in the heart of the flames they dropped down, while they turned their faces toward the base of the cone, or where they thought the base to be, even as Sarka gave another command to the now invisible people of the gens of Dali. Hold your ovoids in your mouth and follow. Obey my will. They dropped now to what seemed to be cool flagstones, while above them showed an orifice in the wall, into which the tongues of flame were darting. They paused there, side by side, their faces radiant, and looked back the way they'd come. Coming out of the white flames, like battalions on parade, were the people of the gens of Dali, scores and hundreds of them, who had sensed and heeded the mental commands of Sarka. Like genii appearing out of the flames, they came to muster about Sarka and Yaska. Then, when it seemed no more were coming, Sarka turned to the base of the cone, his face high shining with courage and confidence, and stepped right into the flames that led into the cone. Beside him came Yaska, while behind him came the people of the gens of Dali, who dared to do as he commanded. They were sucked into the cone like chips sucked into a whirlpool, and Sarka willed a last command as they entered. Quit the column at the lip of the crater, and muster about the air cars. Chapter 18. The People of Radiance. The exaltation of Sarka knew no bounds, and looking into the eyes of Yaska, he knew she felt it too, for her face was shining, and all of her, the wondrous shining brilliance of her, was bathed in the white radiance that mantled Luar. And now, since Yaska too knew that radiance, her beauty was greater than even that of Luar. Sarka thrilled anew at the glory of her. But even as he stepped into the base of the cone, he stepped out of the blue column at the lip of the moon crater. Swift as light, and yet swifter had been the flight upward from the cavern of the cone, yet so keen were his perceptions, he knew when he had passed through the chamber of the bluish glow, into which he and Yaska had first dropped upon arrival. Now they were on the lip of the crater, and the people of the ends who had followed him were slipping out of the blue column like insects out of a flame, and converging on the air cars whose tentacles still waved as they had when Sarka had last seen them. Sarka looked at these people in amazement. To him there was divinity now about their nudeness, which nudity never before suggested to him. The people shone, indeed, there was something glorious in their divinely glowing bodies. They reminded Sarka of his people's books of antiquity and his childhood pictures of angels, but the effects of those white flames... Why, there was no explaining it. But Sarka felt that whatever he willed to do, he could do. Whatever he wished for was his, whether it was his by right or no. He felt that he could move mountains with only the aid of his hands. Looking at Yaska, he conceived all sorts of new beauty in her, for she was the brightest to him of all the people who had passed through the lake of white flames and been cleansed in their heat. No wonder Luar has mastered the moon, for when she was bathed in the white flames, her will is paramount. But how, if she passes the people of gens of Dali through the flames, will she retain her sovereignty? Because Dali too has passed through, and his will is the will of the gens. They will obey him. He's sworn allegiance to Luar, or given some sort of oath of fealty. How strange, but one person on the moon has been bathed in... how strange that but one person on the moon has been bathed in the white flames. How do we know that she is originally of the moon? Does she not look too much like our people to be from another world entirely?
I do not know. You mean... I scarcely know. But Dali would swear allegiance to no man, much less to a woman, unless he knew that man or woman far better than he has had opportunity, in a matter of hours only, to know Luar. He left it there then, as he strode boldly, with Yaska by his side, to the nearest of the air cars. As they approached the car, the gleam cube beneath it seemed to gleam brighter and brighter, as though it echoed the radiance of Sarka. Sarka knew, studying this phenomenon, that he possessed at least a hint of the secret of Luar's omnipotence. There had been a hint before, but now its meaning was clearer. The white flames out of the heart of the dying moon gave new life, exaltation, not only to the bodies, but to the brains of those who passed through it, and with their brains quickened, they possessed such knowledge as men of earth for ages had wished to possess. Transmutation of metals, the ability at will to endow the higher, more selective metals with intelligence, and the ability to retain command of the intelligence thus endowed. This explained the power of Luar over the gnomes, and the power of the gnomes over the cubes, if they possessed that power. But the gnomes, what of them? What were they? But for a space, Sarka must await the answer to that question, for there was little time. Already he knew that the tale of his escape and his taking over of a portion of the gens of Dali must have gone like wildfire through all the crater, and from this crater, perhaps, had been transmitted to all the craters of the moon. All the craters. Admittedly, when they said for a space, I had to resist the urge to be like, it's the Wells drinking game, drink, for a space is Wells's phrase. This isn't H.G. Wells. But with all the fuss about the moon and slave races on the moon, it might make you think so. That explained to him the absence from the Lake of White Flames, where he'd seen so few, comparatively, of the people of Dali's Yens. The moon was honeycombed by such craters. Perhaps the white flame connected them all, made them all one. And Luar commanded all from her dais in the crater that Sarka and his people were escaping. The millions of the Yens had been swallowed by the craters of the moon, at the command of Luar, acceded to by Dali, and all over the moon the very things which Sarka and Yaska had witnessed were taking place. Even now, as Sarka raced for the air car and Yaska with him, he could feel a backward pulling that was well nigh invincible. Someone was willing him to return, willing the gnomes to pursue him, willing the cubes to refuse obedience to him. But he laughed and stepped to the air car, passing by the nearest writhing tentacle, as though he knew it possessed no power to harm him. The tentacle swept aside and did not try to bar him, while he sent his will crashing against that of the brightly gleaming cube. Into the air car. We enter with you. The cube vanished instantly, and it seemed to Sarka that the invisible hands caught at his feet, lifting him up through the trapdoor in the belly of the air car, up and inside. The door swung shut, and in the forward end of the vast air car gleamed the cube which had obeyed his command. Sarka sent one thought careening outward from the air car, a command to the cubes which stood watch beneath the other air cars. Obey the radiant people, and through them, me. The light of the cube made the interior of the air car as light as day, and Sarka was struck at once with another phenomenon. He could see through the sides of the car in any direction, and what he saw filled him with sudden fear. Out of the crater poured myriads of the gnomes, and up the sides of it came myriads of the gleaming cubes, all racing toward the cars. Get back! Get back! He commanded the gnomes and the cubes. At the same time he issued his commands to the cube within his own car, and to the cubes by which now were inside the other air cars, realizing the cubes themselves were the motive power of the air cars, and that his will was the will of those individual cubes. Fly at once! Fly outward at top speed toward the earth! Instantly, as though a single signal had started all the cars, a dozen air cars rose majestically from the crater, while Sarka studied the gnomes and the cubes in turmoil on the rim. He noted then a strange circumstance, that when he commanded the gnomes and the pursuing cubes to keep back, they hesitated, dazedly, as though they did not know whether to advance or to retreat.
that when he merely watched them, they came on. He laughed aloud at this measuring of mental swords with Luar and with Dali, for he could sense the conflict very plainly. She commanded the gnomes and the cubes to attack. He commanded them to retreat, and they remained undecided, like people drawn between two extremities and uncertain which direction to take. Upward, side by side now, floated the air cars of the moon, and in the forepeak of each, one of the gleaming cubes, like anti-gravitational ovoids of the moon. At the fast-falling rim of the crater boiled the gnomes and the cubes, stirring and tumbling, hampered by their very numbers, as they tried to attack at will of Luar, and retreated in confusion at the will of Sarka. Then there was Yaska behind Sarka, her face fearful, as he pointed off across the gloomy expanse of the moon. From all sides, from all directions, from other craters which these two had not even seen, came scores and hundreds of the monstrous cars. They'd beaten Luar and Dali but for a moment then. Now at her command, the countless other air cars were coming in to head them off, to fight them back to the surface of the moon. It'd be a race against time and against death, but of at least a dozen of the air cars, Sarka was master, and he did not fear the issue. The strange exultation with which the white flames had given him filled him with a strange confidence that nothing could shake. He shot a thought at the gleaming cube in the forepeak. "Faster, faster! There's no limit to your speed! Faster! Even faster!" Instantly, the moon seemed literally to drop away beneath the dozen air cars which carried the radiant people, while the air cars of Luar and Dali fell hopelessly behind. Sure that they would win in this race now, since he was just beginning to realize the vastness of her power, the all-encompassing, all-mastering power of the human mind and will, which the white flames of the moon had made almost godlike. Sarka turned his eyes toward a coldly gleaming sphere in the star-spangled heavens ahead. It was the earth, and it seemed ringed in flames. From its edges there seemed to shoot long streamers of yellow or golden flames, which broke into sun-like pinwheels of radiance at their tips. Something there on the precious earth was decidedly wrong. Instantly, telepathically, he sought to gain mental contact with his father. "Father, we're coming," he said across the countless miles. "What's happening?" For a full minute there was no answer. Then it came, feeble, broken, weighted with fear, but it was a thought message, unmistakably of Sarka II. "Hurry, son, hurry. Dali has indeed betrayed us. I could not maintain control of the earth with the barrels, for some strange catastrophe has destroyed all the barrels in the area Dali ruled. The shifting of the positions of the earth and the moon has so altered the relative effects of the pull of gravity exerted by the planets that Mars has been brought into dangerous proximity to us, and is already so close that her ether lights are playing over us. Surely you must be able to see them. We've received messages, but as yet I've only seen them partially. We've not been able to decode them. What I have decoded presages catastrophe, for I'm sure that the Mars and the moon are in confederation, and the moon people have deliberately forced us into contact with her ally." Cold fear clutched at the throat of Sarka as he caught the message. He decided not to tell Yaska for the moment. He looked to his right and to his left, at the air cars on either side of him, then issued his commands. "Faster, faster! Be prepared to land in my area, the gens of the cleric, as close as possible to my lab." A strange, awesome sight, that flight of the rebels of Dali's Yens from the moon to the earth. Like gleaming stars across the void, far out in space they fled at terrific speed through almost utter darkness. But their light was still blinding, lighting the way. And this story will conclude in the September 1930 issue of Astounding Stories. We'll see when we get to it. There's Murder Madness. There's the conclusion of Murder Madness, which I don't recall if we've read. And beyond Murder Madness, there is one more story, The Flying City. But I think we will save Murder Madness by Murray Leinster, the 15th chapter of which we would be reading. We will be saving that for next week. That's right. Unfortunately, there's only so much time in the day in which that I can read. And so another episode of our much beloved time together here on Paper Cuts draws to a close. I really look forward to next week where we can polish off this issue of Astounding Stories and perhaps pick up a story that is astounding, yes, but not from the same, cut from the same cloth, as it were. In fact, it's cut from a cloth that I have shown blatant enthusiasm for before in earlier episodes this season. And that's your hint for what we're reading next. I believe you'll find that it's really quite the tale. But I'll carry on more when we get to it. We've first got to finish this issue next week. On that note, I hope you all have a great evening, a great afternoon, a great morning, whatever time it is out there. Have a great time zone. And this has been Paper Cuts. I hope it didn't sting.